The moment Clara Whitmore's father looked her in the eyes and said, "I've sold you to pay my debts," her entire world shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Within hours, she would stand before a stranger in a dusty chapel, forced to speak vows that would chain her to a man she'd never met, a hardened rancher from the brutal frontier named Wesley Boone. But what terrified Clara most wasn't the wedding itself. It was the look in Wesley's eyes when he saw her. Not hunger, not cruelty, but something far more dangerous: resignation, as if he too had been sentenced rather than saved. Stay with me until the very end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The boarding house smelled of mildew and yesterday's cabbage soup. Clara pressed her ear against the thin wall separating her cramped room from her parents' quarters, her breath catching as her mother's sobs filtered through the cracked plaster like ghosts seeping through stone. "Please, Thomas." Her mother's voice trembled, barely audible. "There must be another way. She's our daughter, our only daughter." "Do you think I don't know that?" Her father's response came sharp and broken, like glass grinding underfoot. "Do you think this doesn't tear me apart? But they'll take everything, Margaret, everything. They'll put us on the street. His voice cracked and silence followed, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any words could. Clara's fingers trembled against the peeling wallpaper. She'd known things were bad. The creditors had been circling for months like vultures over dying cattle, their letters arriving with increasing frequency, each one more threatening than the last. Her father's shipping business had collapsed 6 months ago when his partner disappeared with half their capital, leaving Thomas Whitmore holding debts he could never hope to repay. But this? Whatever this was, it felt different. Final. She pulled back from the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at her own reflection in the cracked mirror hanging beside her narrow bed. 19 years old, dark hair hanging in loose waves past her shoulders, eyes that had once sparkled with dreams of adventure now shadowed with the weight of watching her family slowly drown in poverty. The door to her parents' room opened with a groan of protesting hinges. Clara's breath stopped. Her father appeared in her doorway moments later, his face carved with lines that seemed to have deepened overnight. Thomas Whitmore had once been a proud merchant, his shoulders squared with confidence, his handshake firm enough to seal deals worth thousands of dollars. Now he stood before his daughter like a man already buried, his shoulders curved inward, his eyes refusing to meet hers. "Clara." Her name fell from his lips like a stone into still water. "We need to talk." "I heard you and Mother." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What's happened? What haven't you told me?" Thomas moved into the room slowly, each step seeming to cost him something vital. He sank onto the edge of her bed, his hands clasped between his knees, his gaze fixed on the worn floorboards beneath his feet. "The creditors came yesterday," he said quietly. "The Hartley Group. They've called in every debt I owe. Every single one. They want $23,000, Clara. I don't have 2,300. I don't have 230. Clara's stomach twisted. $23,000 might as well have been 23 million. That kind of money existed in a world so far removed from their current reality that it felt like discussing the distance to the moon. "There must be something we can do," she said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "We could sell. We've sold everything worth selling." Her father's laugh was bitter, hollow. "The house went months ago. Your mother's jewelry, my pocket watch, my father's books, the silver candlesticks your grandmother brought from England, all of it, gone. We're living in a rented room and can barely afford the cabbage soup they serve downstairs. Then we'll leave. We'll go somewhere they can't find us. They'll find us." Thomas finally looked up, and Clara's words died in her throat at the emptiness in his eyes. "Men like the Hartleys always find what they're looking for, and when they do, they'll make an example of us. They'll see me in prison for fraud, Margaret in a workhouse, and you—" He swallowed hard. "You would end up in circumstances I won't even speak aloud." Cold dread pooled in Clara's chest. "So what are you saying, that there's no way out?" "I'm saying I found a way." Her father's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "One way. The only way." The silence that followed felt suffocating. "There's a man," Thomas continued, each word seeming to cut him as he spoke it. "Wesley Boone. He owns a cattle ranch about 3 days' ride west of here, out on the frontier. He's been looking for a wife for the past year, placed advertisements in newspapers across 3 territories. He needs someone to help run his homestead, to build a life in territory so harsh that most women won't even consider it. Clara's blood ran cold. What are you telling me? He's offered to pay your price. The words came out flat, emotionless, as if her father had to strip all feeling from them just to force them past his lips. All of it, $23,000, in exchange for a wife, in exchange for you. The world tilted. Clara gripped the edge of her small dresser, her knuckles white, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. You're joking. You must be joking. I wish to heaven I were. You're selling me? The words exploded from her throat, raw with disbelief and rage. Like property? Like cattle? Clara, please, don't! She stumbled backward, her shoulder hitting the wall. Don't you dare ask me to understand this. Don't you dare ask me to accept it. Thomas rose from the bed, his hands extended toward her like a man trying to calm a spooked horse. You have to believe me when I say I've exhausted every other option. Every single one. I've begged, borrowed, pleaded with everyone I know. No one will help us. No one can help us. This is the only way to save your mother from destitution, the only way to keep us all from So you chose to save yourselves by destroying me? Clara's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. By selling your daughter to a complete stranger? By shipping me off to the frontier like merchandise? He's a decent man, Clara. I swear it. I made inquiries. He's respected in his territory. He owns his land outright, built his ranch with his own hands. He's not a criminal or a brute. He just needs a wife he has to purchase because no woman in her right mind would choose him? Clara laughed, the sound harsh and broken. What kind of man has to buy a bride, father? What kind of decent man does that? Thomas flinched as if she'd struck him. A lonely one. A desperate one. The same kind of desperation that's driven me to this. When? The question came out as a whisper. Her father's face crumbled. Today. He's coming at noon. The ceremony is arranged for 2 o'clock. Today? Clara's legs nearly gave out. You're telling me this today? The day you're handing me over like a piece of furniture? I couldn't. Thomas's voice broke. I couldn't tell you sooner. I couldn't bear to watch you suffer through the waiting. And I was afraid, terrified, that you might run, might disappear, and then we'd all be lost. The truth of it hit Clara like a physical blow. He hadn't told her because he'd known exactly what he was doing. He'd known it was monstrous, indefensible, and he'd been too cowardly to face her reaction until the last possible moment, until it was too late for her to escape. I hate you. The words fell from her lips, quiet and absolute. I will hate you for this until the day I die. Her father's face collapsed, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, but Clara felt nothing. No sympathy, no softening, nothing but a vast and terrible emptiness where her love for him had lived just moments before Chemeg. The hours that followed moved with the surreal quality of a nightmare. Her mother helped her dress in the only nice thing Clara still owned. A simple blue dress she'd made herself 2 years ago, back when her fingers had been steady and her future had seemed bright with possibility. Margaret Whitmore's hands shook as she fastened the buttons, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I'm so sorry, her mother whispered over and over, like a prayer or a curse. I'm so sorry, my darling girl. Clara said nothing. What was there to say? Sorry wouldn't change anything. Sorry wouldn't save her from what was coming. At noon precisely, heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs outside their room. Clara's heart stopped. The knock came firm and steady, the knock of a man who was used to hard decisions and harder living. Thomas opened the door. The man standing in the doorway was not what Clara had expected. Wesley Boone stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling the narrow doorframe. He wore simple frontier clothing, rough canvas pants, a faded shirt, boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard travel. His face was weathered by sun and wind, carved with lines that spoke of years spent outdoors in brutal conditions. His hair was dark, touched with premature gray at the temples, and his jaw was covered with several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that stopped Clara cold. They were gray as storm clouds, deep-set and watchful, and when they landed on her, she saw something that made her stomach twist. Not lust or possession or cruelty, but exhaustion. bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion, as if this man too had been beaten down by circumstances beyond his control and was simply trying to survive the only way he knew how. "Mr. Whitmore." His voice was low and rough, like gravel shifting. "I'm Wesley Boone." "Mr. Boone," Thomas's voice wavered. "Thank you for coming. This is my daughter Clara." Wesley's gaze shifted to Clara fully, and she saw him take her in, not the way a man looked at property he'd purchased, but the way someone might look at a wounded animal they weren't sure how to help. "Miss Whitmore." He gave a small nod. "I apologize for the circumstances." Clara's jaw tightened. "Do you?" Something flickered in Wesley's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "I do. I know this isn't what you chose, but I give you my word that I'll treat you fairly. You'll be safe on my land. You'll be provided for. And I'll never—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'll never force anything on you that you're not willing to give." The promise hung in the air between them, fragile and uncertain. "How generous," Clara said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You've purchased me like livestock, but at least you promised not to brutalize me. I should be grateful, I suppose." Thomas made a strangled sound. "Clara, please, let her speak." Wesley's words cut through the tension like a knife. "She has every right to her anger. I'd be angry too." The simple acknowledgement caught Clara off guard. She'd been prepared for defensiveness, for male pride wounded by her defiance. Instead, this stranger, this man who'd bought her like a piece of property, was giving her permission to rage at him. It somehow made everything worse. "We should go," Wesley said quietly, turning back to Thomas. "The minister's waiting. The sooner we complete the formalities, the sooner we can leave town." "Leave?" Clara's voice cracked. "Today? You're taking me away today?" Wesley's expression remained steady, unreadable. "The frontier is 3 days hard travel from here. We need to leave today if we're going to make it back before the autumn storms hit." "I don't even get time to say goodbye?" Clara looked at her mother, who was sobbing quietly into her handkerchief. "I don't get time to—" "You have the ride to the chapel," Wesley said, not unkindly, "and I'll give you a few minutes after the ceremony. But then we have to go. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough time, but the weather won't wait for sentiment." Clara wanted to scream, to fight, to run. But where would she go? She had no money, no prospects, no way to survive on her own. The world was designed to trap women like her, women without independent means, without male protection, without choices. This was her reality now. This was her life. Wesley had already turned toward the door when Thomas called out, "Wait!" The rancher paused. Thomas crossed to a small trunk in the corner, one of the few possessions they had left, and pulled out a worn leather pouch. His hands trembled as he held it out to Wesley. "Her mother's wedding ring," Thomas said hoarsely, "and a few other small things, family pieces. They're all we have left to give her." Wesley took the pouch carefully, tucking it into his coat pocket. "I'll make sure she gets them. And this," Thomas pulled out a folded paper sealed with wax. "The bank draft. $23,000, as agreed. It will clear the debt with the Hartley Group. Your attorney has all the documentation." Clara watched her father hand over the paper that represented her price tag, her value, her entire future reduced to numbers on a page. Wesley pocketed the draft without looking at it. "It's done then." "Will you—" Thomas's voice broke. "Will you take care of her? Please. Whatever else you think of me, whatever I've done, she's innocent in all this. She deserves— I'll do right by her." Wesley's words were simple, but something in his tone carried the weight of an oath. "That's all I can promise." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Clara moved toward her mother mechanically, letting Margaret fold her into a desperate embrace that smelled of lavender water and tears. "Be strong," her mother whispered fiercely. "You're stronger than you know, Clara. Don't let this break you. Promise me you won't let this break you." Clara couldn't form words. She simply held her mother tight, trying to memorize the feel of her arms, the sound of her heartbeat, knowing that after today, she might never experience this comfort again. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret pressed something small and hard into Clara's palm, a simple silver locket containing tiny portraits of her parents from happier times. "So you'll always carry us with you," her mother whispered, "even when you're far away." Clara closed her fingers around the locket, the metal cold against her skin. Wesley waited silently by the door, giving them what privacy he could in the tiny room. Finally, when there were no more words and no more tears left to shed, Clara walked toward the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Wesley fell into step beside her as they descended the narrow stairs of the boarding house. Outside, a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to two strong horses. The wagon bed was packed with supplies covered by canvas tarps, enough provisions for a journey into the wilderness. Wesley helped Clara up onto the wagon seat with careful, impersonal efficiency, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As the wagon pulled away from the boarding house, Clara turned back one last time to see her parents standing in the doorway. Her mother collapsed against her father, both of them looking like they'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Then the wagon turned a corner, and they disappeared from view. But the chapel was small and dusty, tucked between a butcher shop and a dry goods store on the edge of town. The minister who met them at the door was an elderly man with kind eyes who seemed to understand, without being told, that this was not a joyous occasion. "Mr. Boone," he said quietly. "Miss Whitmore, everything is prepared." Inside, the chapel was dim and cool, smelling of old wood and candle wax. There were no flowers, no decorations, no guests, just the bare minimum required to make the ceremony legal. Clara stood beside Wesley before the simple altar, her body rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. The minister opened his prayer book and began to read the familiar words. Words Clara had heard at her cousin's wedding 3 years ago, words that had once seemed romantic and full of promise. Now they felt like chains being forged around her soul. "Do you, Wesley James Boone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Wesley's voice was steady, emotionless. "And do you, Clara Ann Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The silence stretched. Clara could feel Wesley's gaze on her, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him. She stared straight ahead at the plain wooden cross hanging on the wall behind the minister, her throat tight, her heart pounding. She could refuse. She could say no, walk out of this chapel, let her parents face whatever consequences came their way. But then what? Where would she go? What would she do? "Miss Whitmore," the minister prompted gently. Clara closed her eyes. "I do." The words tasted like ash. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." The minister closed his book with a soft thump. "You may seal your union with a kiss." Wesley didn't move. After a long moment, he said quietly, "That won't be necessary." The minister nodded understandingly and gestured toward a small table where a marriage certificate waited to be signed. Clara's hand shook as she picked up the pen and signed her name, her old name, the last time she would ever write it. Clara Ann Whitmore. Wesley signed next, his handwriting bold and efficient. Wesley James Boone. And just like that, she became Clara Boone. A name that belonged to a stranger, a life that wasn't hers, a future she'd never chosen. "There's a general store 2 streets over," Wesley said as they stepped back out into the afternoon sunlight. "We need to get you proper traveling clothes and supplies for the journey, then we'll leave town before dark." Clara followed him numbly, her mind disconnected from her body. The general store was packed with goods, everything from farming equipment to ladies' dresses, from ammunition to medicine. Wesley moved through it with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he needed. "She'll need sturdy boots," he told the shopkeeper, a round-faced woman with sharp eyes. "Canvas pants if you have them, or split skirt suitable for riding. Warm coat, work gloves, hat with a wide brim." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose slightly as she took in Clara's fine, if worn dress. "Ranch wife?" "Yes," Wesley said simply. The woman nodded and began pulling items from shelves, her expression suggesting she'd seen this scenario before. City girls marrying frontier men, unprepared for the harsh reality waiting for them. Clara tried on the clothes mechanically, changing in a small back room while Wesley waited outside. The boots were heavy and stiff. The canvas pants felt strange and masculine. The coat was thick wool, practical but shapeless. When she emerged, she barely recognized herself in the small mirror on the wall. She looked like someone else entirely, not the merchant's daughter in her blue Sunday dress, but some other person, some frontier woman she didn't know yet. Wesley's expression remained neutral as he nodded approval. That'll do. Can you ride a horse? No, Clara said flatly. Something flickered across his face, not annoyance, but calculation. Then you'll ride in the wagon for now. We'll teach you once we're home. Home. The word felt foreign, impossible. Wesley paid for the clothes and supplies, then loaded everything into the wagon with swift efficiency. The sun was already lowering toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. We'll stop at one more place, Wesley said as he helped Clara back onto the wagon seat. Then we leave. That place turned out to be a telegraph office. Wesley went inside while Clara waited in the wagon, watching the town move around her, people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that hers had just ended. When Wesley returned, he carried a small sealed envelope that he handed to Clara. "What is this?" she asked. "Information," he said as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "About my ranch, my property, the territory we're headed to." "Maps! Also, the name and address of my attorney in the nearest town to the ranch, a place called Broken Creek, about a day's ride from my land. If anything happens to me on the trail, or if you ever need legal help, he'll assist you." Clara stared at the envelope. "Why are you giving me this?" Wesley glanced at her briefly, then focused back on the horses. "Because you should know where you're going and have a way out if you need one." The answer surprised her. "A way out? My attorney has instructions," Wesley said quietly as the wagon began to move, carrying them toward the edge of town and the wilderness beyond. "If you find ranch life unbearable, if you want to leave, he'll arrange passage back to civilization and provide you with enough money to start over somewhere else. It won't be a fortune, but it'll be enough to survive on until you can find work." Clara's throat tightened. "Why would you do that? You just paid $23,000 for me." "I paid $23,000 to clear your father's debt," Wesley corrected. "You're not property, Clara. You're a person who got trapped in an impossible situation, same as me. I need help on my ranch. Real help, not a slave or a prisoner. If you choose to stay, I need you to stay because you want to, not because you have no other choice. And if I choose to leave the moment we reach Broken Creek," Wesley's jaw tightened slightly, "then I'll have paid $23,000 for nothing, and I'll go back to running my ranch alone until it breaks me or kills me, which it probably will." The honesty in his voice was jarring. Clara looked down at the envelope in her hands, then at the man sitting beside her, this stranger who was now her husband, who'd given her an escape route, even though it would cost him everything. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why go through all this if you're just going to give me a way out?" Wesley was silent for a long moment as the wagon rolled past the last buildings of town and into open country. Finally, he said, "Because I remember what it's like to have no choices, and I won't do that to someone else, no matter how desperate I am." The wagon continued west as the sun sank lower, painting long shadows across the prairie grass. Behind them, the town faded into the distance. Ahead, the frontier stretched endlessly, vast, unknown, and unforgiving. Clara clutched the envelope and the silver locket in her lap, artifacts of two different lives, the one she'd lost and the one she was being carried toward whether she wanted it or not. Neither she nor Wesley spoke as the landscape transformed around them. The roads grew rougher, the settlements farther apart, until finally there was nothing but wilderness. Rolling hills covered in golden grass, distant mountains purple against the darkening sky, and silence so profound it felt like the world had forgotten how to breathe. When full darkness fell, Wesley pulled the wagon off the trail into a small clearing sheltered by cottonwood trees near a creek. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, climbing down and beginning to unhitch the horses with practiced efficiency. "There's a bedroll in the wagon for you. I'll sleep by the fire." Clara watched him work, this man who was her husband, but might as well have been a complete stranger. He moved with the quiet competence of someone who'd done these tasks 1,000 times, tending the horses, building a fire, setting up a simple camp that somehow felt safer than anything Clara had experienced all day. When the fire was burning steadily, Wesley pulled out supplies and prepared a simple meal of bread, dried meat, and coffee. He handed Clara a tin plate and cup without ceremony, then settled on the opposite side of the fire with his own portion. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of flames and the distant cry of some night bird Clara couldn't identify. Finally, Wesley spoke. "You should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be harder. Rougher terrain, longer hours in the saddle." "I'm not tired," Clara lied. In truth, exhaustion pulled at her bones, but the thought of closing her eyes, of surrendering to unconsciousness in this strange place with this strange man, felt impossible. Wesley studied her across the fire. "You're afraid of me." It wasn't a question. Clara met his gaze steadily. "Shouldn't I be?" "No." The word came out flat and absolute. "But I understand why you are. I'm a stranger who showed up and took you away from everything you knew. For all you know, I've been lying about everything. About the ranch, about the escape route, about all of it." "Have you?" Clara asked. "No." Wesley poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "But you have no reason to believe me yet. Trust has to be earned. I know that." "So earn it," Clara challenged, surprised by the boldness in her own voice. Wesley looked at her for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his weathered face. "Fair enough. What do you want to know?" "Everything." Clara leaned forward slightly. "You bought a wife like she was a piece of land or a horse. Normal men don't do that. So tell me, why? What happened to you that made this seem like the only option?" A muscle tightened in Wesley's jaw. For a moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry years of accumulated pain. "I came out to the frontier 7 years ago," he began quietly. "I was 22, broke, and desperate for a fresh start. My father was a drunk who beat my mother until she stopped trying to get up. When she finally died, I left, came west with nothing but the clothes on my back and anger in my heart." He paused, staring into the flames. "I worked every job you can imagine, railroad crew, mining, cattle drives, saved every penny. 5 years of breaking my back and living on practically nothing. Finally had enough to file a homestead claim and buy starter cattle. Built my ranch from the ground up, cabin, barn, fences, everything. Did it all alone because I'd learned not to trust anyone, not to need anyone." "So why change that now?" Clara asked. "Because I was dying." Wesley's words fell heavy as stones. Not physically, but inside something was going dark. I'd wake up in that empty cabin and forget why I was fighting so hard to survive. I'd spend entire weeks without speaking a single word out loud because there was no one to speak to. The isolation. It does things to your mind. Makes you question whether you're even real anymore. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. She knew what it was like to feel invisible, to wonder if anyone would notice if you simply disappeared. "So I decided I needed a partner," Wesley continued. "Someone to share the work, the responsibility, the life I'd built. I placed advertisements in newspapers across 3 territories. Do you know how many responses I got?" Clara shook her head. 47, Wesley said. 47 letters from women interested in becoming a frontier bride. I wrote back to all of them honestly, told them exactly what ranch life was like, how hard the work would be, how isolated we'd be, how brutal the conditions. After that, I got 3 responses. 3 women willing to consider it. "What happened to them?" Clara asked. "The first one arrived, took one look at my cabin and the wilderness around it, and got back on the stage the same day. Didn't even stay long enough to unpack her bags." Wesley's expression was rueful. "The second one made it 2 weeks before she left. Said she'd rather risk poverty back in civilization than die of loneliness on my ranch." "And the third?" Wesley's face darkened. "The third one was Emily. She stayed 6 months. We were happy, I thought, or at least content. Then one morning I woke up and she was gone. Took one of my horses, half my supplies, and my cash box, about $1,500 I'd saved for buying breeding stock. Left a note saying she'd only come out to the frontier to rob lonely fools like me, and thanks for making it so easy." Clara's breath caught. "She stole from you?" "Every penny I'd saved after building the ranch." Wesley's voice was tight. "Set me back 2 years. And more than that, it broke something in me. Made me realize I was never going to find someone willing to share this life out of love or partnership. Any woman with options would choose differently. The only way I'd ever have help, have company, have a future that wasn't slowly going insane in isolation was to make it worth someone's while financially." "So you looked for someone desperate enough to have no choice," Clara said quietly. "Yes." Wesley didn't flinch from the accusation. I made inquiries through business contacts about men drowning in debt, men who might have daughters they couldn't provide for. Your father's name came up. His situation was suitable. And when I saw your photograph, when I read about you in his correspondence, you seemed like someone who might survive the frontier if given the chance. Someone strong enough. You saw a photograph and decided I was strong enough? Clara laughed bitterly. You don't know anything about me. No, Wesley agreed. I don't. That's the gamble. For both of us. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the darkness, the creek murmured over stones. I won't apologize for what I've done, Wesley said finally, because there's no apology big enough to cover it. But I will make you a different promise, the same one I made in that chapel. I'll treat you fairly. I'll never force myself on you. And if you truly can't bear ranch life, I'll help you leave. That's all I can offer. Clara studied him across the fire. This broken, desperate man who'd bought her like property, but somehow still saw her as a person. It didn't make what he'd done right. It didn't erase her anger or her grief. But it was something. A small, strange foundation to build on, perhaps. Tell me about the ranch, she said finally. I might as well know what I'm walking into. Relief flickered across Wesley's face. Relief that she was willing to engage, to try. It's 320 acres of claimed homestead. The cabin is small, 2 rooms, sturdy but rough. There's a barn for the horses and milk cow, a chicken coop, and pasture for the cattle. Right now I'm running about 60 head. Should be 80, but I lost 20 last winter in a bad storm. What would I do there? Claire asked. What would my role be? Everything, Wesley said bluntly. That's the reality of frontier ranching. There's no hired help, no servants, no division between men's work and women's work. You'd help with the cattle when needed, mending fences, moving herds, caring for sick animals. You'd handle the chickens, the garden, food preparation, preservation for winter. You'd help with repairs, with hauling water, with cutting firewood. During calving season, we'd both be working 18-hour days. During harvest, same thing. And the rest of the time? Clara asked. Wesley shrugged. Survival. Always something that needs doing. The frontier doesn't give you rest. It sounds impossible. It is impossible, Wesley said flatly, for one person. That's why I need a partner. I can't keep doing it alone. I'm already half dead from trying. Clara looked down at her hands, soft hands, city hands, hands that had never done hard manual labor in her life. In a few days, they'd be calloused and bleeding, she suspected. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted quietly. Neither do I, Wesley said. But I know you're tougher than you think. You survived today. That took strength. I didn't survive. I was dragged along. You're here, Wesley countered. You're talking to me instead of falling apart. You're asking questions instead of giving up. That's survival. That's strength. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was finally overwhelming her defenses. Her eyelids felt heavy as lead, her body aching from the long day of trauma and travel. Get some sleep, Wesley said gently, reading her expression. I'll keep watch. You're safe, Clara. I promise you that much. Clara rose slowly and moved to the wagon where Wesley had laid out a bedroll for her. She crawled into it fully clothed, too tired to care about comfort or propriety. As she lay there staring up at the vast expanse of stars overhead, more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, uncountable and cold and indifferent, she heard Wesley add another log to the fire. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that tomorrow she'd wake up even farther from home, even deeper into a life she'd never chosen. And there would be no going back. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of horses nickering softly in the gray pre-dawn light. For one confused moment, she thought she was back in her narrow bed at the boarding house, that yesterday had been nothing but a nightmare. Then reality crashed back with the weight of a falling timber. She sat up in the bedroll, her body stiff and aching from sleeping on the hard ground. Wesley was already up, crouched beside the fire with a battered tin coffee pot, his back to her. He'd rolled up his sleeves, and Claire could see the corded muscles of his forearms, the weathered skin of someone who'd spent years working under an unforgiving sun. Morning, he said without turning around, as if he'd sensed her movement. Coffee's ready. We need to be moving in 20 minutes. Clara pushed herself out of the bedroll, her hair tangled, her borrowed dress wrinkled beyond redemption. She felt grimy, exhausted, and hollow. Is there somewhere I can... Creek's just through those trees, Wesley said, nodding toward a gap in the cottonwoods. Water's cold but clean. There's soap in the wagon, second crate on the left. Clara found the soap and a rough towel, then made her way to the creek on unsteady legs. The water was indeed freezing, fed by mountain snowmelt, and it shocked her fully awake as she splashed her face and neck. She did her best to clean herself and smooth her hair, knowing it was futile. She'd be dusty and disheveled again within an hour on the trail. When she returned to camp, Wesley had packed everything except the coffee and 2 tin cups. He handed her one without comment, along with a piece of hard bread and some dried fruit. "It's not much," he said, "but we'll stop for a real meal at midday." They ate quickly and in silence. Clara watched Wesley work with the efficient economy of someone who'd done these morning tasks 1,000 times, dousing the fire, loading the wagon, checking the horse's hooves and harnesses. Every movement served a purpose. Nothing wasted. "You'll want to change into those canvas pants," Wesley said as he cinched the last strap on the wagon. "That dress won't survive the trail." Clara hesitated. The idea of wearing men's clothing felt strange, almost scandalous, even though she knew plenty of frontier women did it out of necessity. Wesley seemed to read her discomfort. "I'll water the horses downstream. You'll have privacy." He walked away before she could respond, leading both animals toward the creek with easy familiarity. Clara changed quickly in the wagon bed, fumbling with the unfamiliar buttons and ties. The canvas pants felt stiff and foreign against her legs, the boots heavy as iron. But when she climbed down and took a few experimental steps, she had to admit they were more practical than any dress could be. Wesley returned with the horses and stopped short when he saw her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Clara thought he might comment, might say something that would make her feel even more self-conscious. Instead, he simply nodded once and said, "Good. You'll be more comfortable that way." Then he helped her up onto the wagon seat, and they were moving again, the rising sun at their backs, the endless prairie stretching before them like an ocean of grass. The first hours passed in relative silence. Wesley kept the horses at a steady pace, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon with the vigilance of someone who knew danger could come from anywhere. Clara clutched the wagon seat, trying to find some position that didn't make every bone in her body ache from the constant jostling. As the sun climbed higher, the landscape began to change. The gentle hills gave way to rougher terrain, rocky outcroppings, steep ravines, patches of scrub brush that looked capable of tearing flesh. The trail they followed was barely visible, just 2 faint ruts worn into the earth by previous travelers. "How much farther?" Clara asked finally, breaking the long silence. 2 more days if the weather holds," Wesley said. 3 if we hit rain and the trail turns to mud. 2 more days of this. Clara's heart sank. "And you make this journey how often?" 3, maybe 4 times a year? To sell cattle, buy supplies, conduct business?" He glanced at her briefly. "It's not a trip I take lightly. Every time I leave the ranch for more than a day, I'm gambling that something won't go wrong while I'm gone." "What could go wrong?" Wesley's expression darkened. "Cattle thieves, wolves, storms, fire. Take your pick. The frontier gives you 1,000 ways to lose everything you've built, and it only takes one moment of bad luck." The grim assessment sent a chill through Clara despite the growing heat of the day. "Has anything ever happened while you were away?" "Once," Wesley said tightly. 2 years ago, I was gone for 5 days. Came back to find my barn burned to the ground. Lost 3 horses and most of my hay stores. Never found out if it was lightning, accident, or sabotage." "Sabotage? Who would do that?" "Plenty of people," Wesley said. "Claim jumpers who want my land, rival ranchers who see me as competition, drifters who resent anyone with property. The frontier attracts people running from something, and not all of them are running from circumstances. Some are running from consequences." Clara absorbed this information, her anxiety growing. "So you're bringing me to a place where we're isolated, vulnerable, and surrounded by potential enemies?" "Yes," Wesley said bluntly. "I won't lie to you about what you're walking into. It's dangerous, it's harsh, and the law is days away if we ever need it, which means we handle our own problems." He paused. "But I'm also bringing you to a place where we'll be free. No landlords, no creditors, no society telling us how to live. Just us, the land, and what we can make of it." "That sounds lonely," Clara said quietly. "It is," Wesley admitted. "Profoundly lonely. But there's also something clean about it, simple. You work hard, you survive. You slack off, you die. There's no politics, no pretense, just reality. Clara wasn't sure if that was meant to be comforting or terrifying, probably both. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Wesley pulled the wagon into the shade of a rock formation and helped Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, muscles screaming from hours of sitting in one position. Walk around a bit, Wesley advised. Get your blood moving. We'll rest here for an hour. He unpacked more supplies and built a small fire, setting a battered pot over the flames to heat. Clara watched him add water, dried beans, and some kind of preserved meat, creating a simple stew that smelled better than anything had a right to in the middle of nowhere. While the food cooked, Clara walked in slow circles, stretching her aching body. The landscape here was starkly beautiful in its harshness, red rock carved by wind and water into strange shapes, hardy plants clinging to life in impossible places, a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "What made you choose this place?" Clara asked, gesturing at the wilderness around them. "Why come out here instead of settling somewhere easier?" Wesley stirred the pot, not looking up. "Because easy places are already taken. By the time I had money for land, all the good territory near civilization was claimed or too expensive. Out here, land was available through homesteading. You file a claim, prove you can work it for 5 years, and it's yours, free and clear." "But 5 years alone?" Clara shook her head. "That must have been hell," Wesley finished. "It was hell, especially the winters. I'd go months without seeing another human face. Started talking to my horses just to hear a voice, even if it was my own." He finally looked up at her. "That's why when Emily left and took my money, it wasn't just the theft that broke me. It was realizing I'd been so desperate for company that I'd ignored every warning sign. She'd been planning to rob me from the moment she arrived, and I'd been too lonely to see it." Clara sat down on a nearby rock, careful not to get too close to him. "How do you know I won't do the same thing?" Wesley ladled stew into 2 tin bowls and handed her one. "I don't. But the difference is I'm not lying to you about what this is. You know exactly what you're getting into. And I've given you a way out that doesn't require stealing from me. If you want to leave, you can do it honestly." "That's assuming I make it to your ranch in the first place," Clara said, tasting the stew. It was simple but surprisingly good, the meat tender despite being preserved. "What if I can't handle the journey? What if I collapse or get sick or—" "Then I'll take care of you," Wesley interrupted calmly. "Same as I'd take care of an injured horse or a sick cow. Not because you're property," he added quickly, seeing her expression, "but because it's the practical thing to do. Out here, you don't leave people behind. That's how everyone dies." They ate in silence for a while, Clara turning his words over in her mind. There was a strange logic to Wesley's worldview, brutal and pragmatic, but internally consistent. He wasn't trying to convince her that their arrangement was romantic or ideal. He was simply stating facts and letting her draw her own conclusions. "Tell me about the other ranchers," Clara said finally. "You mentioned rival ranchers. Are there many people nearby?" Wesley shook his head. "Nearby is a relative term. My closest neighbor is about 12 miles east, a man named Harlan Porter, who runs sheep instead of cattle. We're civil to each other, but sheep ranchers and cattle ranchers don't exactly socialize. Different breeds, different needs." "Why don't they socialize?" "Because cattle and sheep don't mix well on open range," Wesley explained. "Cattle are rough on grassland. They pull grass up by the roots. Sheep are more delicate grazers. If cattle and sheep share the same pasture, the cattle destroy what the sheep need to survive. So there's always tension over land use, water rights, that sort of thing." "But you said you were civil?" "Porter and I have an agreement. We stay on our own land, we don't let our animals wander onto each other's property, and we help each other out in genuine emergencies, like if one of us gets injured and needs someone to ride for a doctor. Beyond that, we keep our distance." Wesley scraped the last of his stew from the bowl. "There are a few other homesteaders scattered throughout the territory. You'll meet some of them eventually at gatherings in Broken Creek." "What kind of gatherings?" "Town meetings, supply runs, occasional dances or socials." Wesley looked uncomfortable. "Fair warning, frontier women are going to be curious about you. Word travels fast in isolated communities. They'll know within a week that I bought a bride from back east, and they'll have opinions about it." Clara's stomach tightened. "What kind of opinions?" "Judgmental ones, mostly. Some women will see you as someone who sold herself and look down on you for it. Others will understand the desperation that leads to choices like this, and be more sympathetic. You won't know which is which until you meet them. And the men? Clara asked quietly. Wesley's expression hardened. The men will know you're my wife, and that means you're off limits. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me. There was something cold and final in his tone that made Clara believe he meant every word. They finished eating and packed up quickly. The afternoon portion of the journey was even harder than the morning. The temperature climbed brutally high, and the trail grew steeper and more treacherous. Wesley had to slow the horses to a crawl as they navigated a series of switchbacks that dropped away on one side into a deep canyon. Clara gripped the wagon seat until her knuckles turned white, trying not to look at the sheer drop just feet away from the wheels. Don't look down, Wesley said calmly. Look at the trail ahead. Trust the horses. They know what they're doing. How often do wagons go over the edge? Clara asked through clenched teeth. Often enough that there's a reason we're going slow, Wesley said. But I've made this crossing 24 times and haven't lost a wagon yet. Don't plan to start today. Despite his confidence, Clara didn't breathe easily until they reached the bottom of the switchbacks and the trail leveled out again. Her hands were shaking, and she felt nauseated from the combination of fear and relentless motion. Wesley noticed. There's water in the canteen behind the seat. Drink some. Clara did, the tepid water doing little to settle her stomach, but at least soothing her parched throat. They pushed on through the afternoon, the landscape shifting again into high prairie marked by wind-bent grass and distant mesas. Wesley pointed out landmarks as they went, a distinctive rock formation that marked the halfway point of their journey, a creek where the water was safe to drink, areas where bandits were known to operate. We'll camp early tonight, Wesley said as the sun began its descent. There's a spot ahead with good cover and a spring. We'll need to water the horses and refill our supplies. The campsite, when they reached it, was a small hollow protected on 3 sides by rock walls, with a clear spring bubbling up from the ground. Wesley pulled the wagon into the shelter and immediately began setting up camp with the same efficient routine as the night before. This time, Clara tried to help. What can I do? Wesley looked surprised, but didn't object. Gather firewood. Nothing green. Look for dead branches, dry twigs, and stay within sight of camp. Clara ventured out into the surrounding area, searching for suitable wood. It was harder than she'd expected. Everything was either too green or too large for her to carry. By the time she returned to camp with an armload of questionable branches, Wesley had already built a fire using his own collection. He glanced at what she'd brought and said diplomatically, "That'll do for later. Good first effort." Clara knew he was being kind. Her collection was pitiful compared to his. But he didn't belabor the point, just showed her how to stack the wood near the fire so it would be ready when needed. As darkness fell and dinner cooked over the flames, Clara found herself studying Wesley more carefully. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably only 29 or 30, but carried himself with the weariness of someone much older. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered, his eyes holding a watchfulness that never quite turned off. "What are you thinking about?" Wesley asked, catching her staring. Clara flushed. "I'm trying to figure out who you are. I told you last night." "No," Clara interrupted. "You told me facts. Your history. But facts aren't the same as understanding someone." She hesitated, then forged ahead. "You bought a wife, Wesley. That's an extreme thing to do. I'm trying to understand what kind of man does that." Wesley was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. Finally, he said, "A desperate man. A broken man. A man who tried every other option and failed at all of them." He looked up at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "I'm not proud of what I did, Clara, but I'd do it again because the alternative, spending the rest of my life slowly dying of loneliness on that ranch, was worse than any moral compromise." "That's honest, at least," Clara said softly. "I'm always honest," Wesley said. "It's one of the few virtues I've managed to hold on to. Out here, lies get people killed. If I tell you something, you can trust it's true. Even if the truth is ugly, especially if the truth is ugly." Wesley pulled the pot off the fire and divided the contents between 2 bowls. "Pretty lies are how people end up in situations they can't survive. I'd rather you hate me for being honest than die because I told you what you wanted to hear." They ate dinner in contemplative silence. Clara's body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. But her mind remained restless, churning with questions and fears about what awaited her at the end of this journey. Can I ask you something? Clara said as Wesley cleaned the dishes with sand from the spring. Always. If I do stay, if I decide the ranch is bearable, what happens then? Between us, I mean. Wesley's hand stilled. What do you want to happen? I don't know, Clara admitted. That's why I'm asking. You said you'd never force anything on me. But we're married, legally bound. Eventually there will be expectations. Not from me, Wesley said firmly. I meant what I said, Clara. I need a partner to help run the ranch. If that's all we ever are, two people working together to survive, then that's enough. If someday you decide you want more, we can discuss it then. But I won't ever push for it, and I won't hold our legal marriage over your head as leverage. Why not? Clara asked. Most men would. Wesley met her eyes steadily. Because I've been powerless before. I know what it feels like to have no choices, no control over your own life. I won't inflict that on someone else, even if the law says I have the right to. Clara studied him, this strange, contradictory man who'd committed an act of calculated cruelty by buying her but somehow still possessed enough humanity to give her dignity within that cruelty. I don't know if I can trust you, she said quietly. I don't blame you, Wesley replied. Trust me or don't, your choice. But watch what I do, not just what I say. Actions matter more than words out here. He stood and moved to his own bedroll on the opposite side of the fire, settling in with his back to her, giving her privacy. Clara lay down in her own bedroll, staring up at the vast expanse of stars overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, the sound lonely and wild. Another answered from a different direction, their calls echoing across the empty prairie. She thought about her parents back in that cramped boarding house, wondered if they were sleeping or if guilt kept them awake. She thought about the life she'd lost, her few friends, her small dreams, her illusion of safety. And she thought about Wesley, this man who was her husband but not her husband, who'd imprisoned her with circumstances but given her the keys to her own cage. Sleep came eventually, restless and thin, full of dreams where she was running through endless wilderness, searching for something she couldn't name. The next day began much like the previous one. Coffee before dawn, quick breakfast, hours of jolting travel through increasingly rugged terrain. But as the morning progressed, Clara noticed Wesley growing tense, his eyes scanning the horizon more frequently, his hand occasionally drifting to the rifle tucked beside the wagon seat. What's wrong? Clara asked. Maybe nothing, Wesley said. But we're in territory where bandits operate sometimes, and I saw dust on the horizon about an hour ago, riders, probably 3 or 4 of them, maybe 5 miles back. Clara's heart jumped. Following us? Could be coincidence. This is one of the few passable trails through this region, but I don't believe in taking chances. He urged the horses to a slightly faster pace. There's a narrow pass about 2 miles ahead. If we can get through it before those riders catch up, we'll have the advantage. The pass is defensible, and there's no other route for them to take without adding a full day to their journey. And if we don't make it? Wesley's jaw tightened. Then we deal with whatever comes. The next 2 hours were tense and silent. Clara kept glancing back over her shoulder, searching for signs of pursuit, while Wesley pushed the horses as hard as he dared on the rough trail. The wagon bounced violently over rocks and ruts, and Clara had to grip the seat to keep from being thrown off. Finally, the pass came into view. A narrow gap between 2 towering rock walls, barely wide enough for the wagon. There, Wesley said, relief evident in his voice. Once we're through, we'll be… Ooh. A gunshot cracked through the air. Wesley swore and snapped the reins hard, and the horses surged forward. Another shot rang out, and Clara heard the bullet whistle past, far too close. Get down! Wesley shouted, and Clara threw herself flat on the wagon bed as he drove the horses at a reckless gallop toward the pass. More shots followed, the sound echoing off the rock walls. Clara pressed her face against the rough wood of the wagon bed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The wagon careened through the narrow pass, wheels scraping against rock on both sides. For a terrifying moment, Clara thought they were stuck. But then they burst through into open ground on the other side. Wesley hauled on the reins, bringing the horses to a plunging stop. He grabbed his rifle and jumped down, taking cover behind a boulder at the entrance to the pass. Stay in the wagon, he ordered Clara. Keep your head down. Clara obeyed, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear. She could hear voices now, men shouting to each other from the other side of the pass. their words indistinct but their tone aggressive. Then one voice called out clearly, "Boone, we know that's you. We just want to talk." Wesley didn't respond, his rifle trained on the narrow opening. "Come on, Boone. We're not here to cause trouble. Just want to have a conversation about that water access dispute. You know, the one you've been avoiding for 6 months?" Clara risked lifting her head slightly. "Water access dispute?" she whispered. "Later," Wesley said tersely, his eyes never leaving the pass. Then louder, he called back, "If you wanted to talk, Crenshaw, you wouldn't have opened fire. Now turn around and ride back the way you came." "Can't do that," the voice, Crenshaw, shouted back. "This is business, Boone, and you're not the only one with a stake in that spring. The spring is on my land. I have the legal claim. Legal don't mean much out here, and you know it." Crenshaw's voice turned ugly. "What means something is who's willing to fight for what they want. And I got 5 men with me, Boone. How many you got? Just you and that pretty new wife we heard about?" Clara's blood ran cold. Wesley's finger tightened on the trigger. "You leave her out of this." "Hard to leave her out when she's right there," Crenshaw laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "Tell you what, you give up your claim to that spring, sign it over nice and legal, and we'll ride out peaceful. Nobody gets hurt, your wife stays safe, everybody wins. Except me, losing access to the only reliable water source on my property," Wesley said. "Well, that's your problem, not mine." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Clara could see Wesley's mind working, calculating odds, considering options. The pass was narrow enough that the riders couldn't come through more than one at a time, which gave him a defensive advantage. But if they decided to wait him out, he and Clara would run out of water and supplies long before 5 men on horseback would. "I need to know something," Wesley called out. "Did the Hartley group send you?" There was a pause, then Crenshaw laughed again. "What if they did?" Wesley's face went pale, then flushed with anger. He glanced back at Clara, something terrible dawning in his eyes. "What?" Clara whispered. "What does that mean?" "It means," Wesley said quietly, "that the same men who held your father's debt are trying to take my land, and I think they've been planning this longer than either of us realized." Clara's mind reeled as Wesley's words sank in. "What are you talking about? How could they have been planning this?" "Think about it," Wesley said, his voice tight with controlled fury, his eyes still locked on the narrow pass. "Your father's debt gets called in by the Hartley group. They refuse every reasonable payment plan, every negotiation. Then, suddenly, conveniently, I appear with enough money to clear the entire debt in exchange for you. And now, less than a week later, armed men connected to the same group are trying to force me off my water rights." He laughed bitterly. "We're not husband and wife, Clara. We're both marks in the same con." "You think they wanted you to spend that money?" Clara's voice rose despite her fear. "That they deliberately set this up so you'd be vulnerable?" $23,000 is everything I had saved, Wesley said. "Every penny from 7 years of brutal work. Without it, I can't hire help, can't buy supplies for winter, can't afford to fight legal battles over land rights. They've stripped me of my financial resources, and now they're moving in for the kill." From beyond the pass, Crenshaw called out again, his voice dripping with mock patience. "Clock's ticking, Boone. What's it going to be? Sign over the water rights, or we come through there and take what we want?" Wesley's finger moved to the trigger. "If you come through this pass, Crenshaw, the first man through dies. Guarantee it. And the second, maybe the third. That narrow gap makes you sitting ducks, and you know it." "You can't hold out forever," Crenshaw shouted back, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "We got supplies, we got time. And I've got the high ground and enough ammunition to make this very expensive for you," Wesley returned. Then, quieter, to Clara. "There's a second rifle in the crate behind you. Can you shoot?" Clara's hands trembled as she reached for the crate. "I've never even held a gun." "Then you're about to learn." Wesley's voice was grim but steady. "Get the rifle. Don't try to shoot anyone unless I go down. Just make them think there are 2 of us armed and ready. Sometimes the threat is enough." Clara fumbled with the crate, her fingers clumsy with fear. The rifle was heavier than she expected, the metal cold even in the afternoon heat. She had no idea how to load it, how to aim it, how to make it do anything other than look vaguely threatening. Wesley risked a glance back at her and must have seen the terror in her face. His expression softened slightly. You're doing fine. Just hold it like you mean it. And Clara, if shooting starts and I tell you to run, you run. Don't argue. Don't look back. Take the wagon and horses and get to Broken Creek. My attorney will help you from there. I'm not leaving you to die, Clara said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. You will if I tell you to, Wesley said firmly, because one of us surviving is better than both of us dying for pride. Before Clara could argue, a new voice called out from the pass, younger, more nervous than Crenshaw's. Maybe we should just go, boss. This ain't worth getting shot over. Shut up, Danny, Crenshaw snapped. We came here to settle this and we're going to settle it. But he's got the pass bottlenecked. We can't get through without… I said shut up! Wesley caught Clara's eye and mouthed the word divided. He was right. Dissension in the enemy ranks was an advantage, however small. If they could exploit it, widen the crack in Crenshaw's authority, maybe the men would lose their nerve and retreat. Listen to Danny, Wesley called out, pitching his voice to Carrie. He's the only one of you with sense. This is a fight you can't win, and Crenshaw knows it. He's willing to let you die for his pride, but you don't have to. You can ride away right now, no shame in it. Don't listen to him, Crenshaw's voice cracked with anger. He's bluffing. He's alone out there with some city girl who probably can't even… A shot rang out, and rock exploded near Wesley's position. He returned fire instantly, and Clara heard a scream of pain from beyond the pass. That's Otto hit, someone yelled. He's bleeding bad. Then patch him up, Crenshaw roared. We're not backing down. The hell we're not. That was Danny again, his voice high with panic. Otto's losing too much blood. We need to get him to a doctor or he's going to die. We finish this first. Finish it yourself, Danny shouted back. I didn't sign up to get killed over some damn water rights. Otto needs help now, and I'm taking him back to Broken Creek. The sound of horses moving, men arguing in furious whispers. Then hoofbeats, fading into the distance. 2 horses, maybe 3. Wesley kept his rifle trained on the pass, his body tense as a coiled spring. Long minutes passed in silence. Finally, Crenshaw's voice came again, but it was different now, stripped of bravado, edged with desperation. This isn't over, Boone. The Hartley Group owns half this territory. They've got lawyers, they've got money, they've got connections. You think winning one standoff changes anything? I think it means you failed your job, Wesley called back coldly. And I think the Hartley Group doesn't tolerate failure. You better hope they're more forgiving than their reputation suggests. You're a dead man, Crenshaw said, but there was defeat in his tone. You and that wife. Both of you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You can't fight them forever. Watch me, Wesley said. More hoofbeats, growing fainter. Then silence, deep and profound, broken only by the wind whistling through the pass. Wesley didn't move for a long time, his rifle still aimed at the narrow opening, every muscle in his body radiating tension. Clara barely dared to breathe, the unfamiliar weight of the rifle heavy in her arms. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Wesley slowly lowered his weapon. They're gone. For now. Clara's legs gave out, and she sank onto the wagon bed, the rifle clattering from her nerveless fingers. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline flooding through her system with nowhere to go. What just happened? What was all that? Wesley climbed back into the wagon, his face carved from stone. That was the Hartley Group showing their hand. They wanted my land, so they engineered a situation where I'd be forced to spend all my resources. Then they sent their muscle to finish me off while I was vulnerable. But why? Clara demanded. Why go through such an elaborate scheme? If they wanted your land, couldn't they just, I don't know, make you an offer? I've refused their offers, Wesley said as he checked the horses for injuries. One had a shallow graze along its flank where a bullet had come too close, but otherwise they were unharmed. 3 times over the past 2 years, they've approached me about selling. Each time, I've said no. My land sits on one of the best natural spring systems in the territory. Whoever controls that water controls grazing rights for miles around. It's worth a fortune to someone building a cattle empire. So they decided to take it by force? Not directly. Too messy, too obvious. Wesley's expression was bitter as he began moving the wagon away from the pass, putting distance between them and any potential return of Crenshaw's men. But they could orchestrate circumstances that would force me to deplete my resources, then use that vulnerability to pressure me into selling cheap or simply abandoning the claim. And if I died defending it? He shrugged. Well, accidents happen on the frontier all the time. Claire's mind was spinning, trying to connect all the pieces. My father's debt. They could have accepted his payment plans, could have shown mercy. But they didn't because they knew about you, knew you were looking for a wife, knew you had money saved. That's my guess, Wesley said. They're nothing if not thorough. They saw an opportunity to trap two desperate people and profit from both. This is insane, Clara breathed. They destroyed my family, bankrupted you, and nearly got us both killed, all for water rights? Out here, water is life, Wesley said simply. Men have killed for less. They traveled in tense silence for the next hour, Wesley constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit or ambush. Claire's hands wouldn't stop shaking, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Wesley pulled the wagon into a dense thicket of juniper trees that provided cover from all sides. We'll camp here. No fire tonight. Too risky. Cold dinner, and we take turns on watch. You think they'll come back? I don't know, Wesley admitted. Crenshaw's pride is wounded, but he's also got an injured man and is down to maybe 2 companions. He'd be stupid to try again tonight, but I've learned not to underestimate stupidity. They ate a cheerless meal of dried meat and hard biscuits, washed down with water from the canteen. The food tasted like dust in Claire's mouth, but she forced it down, knowing she needed the energy. As darkness fell, Wesley settled with his back against a tree trunk, his rifle across his lap. Try to sleep. I'll wake you in a few hours to take a turn at watch. I won't be able to sleep, Clara said. But even as the words left her mouth, exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. The adrenaline crash was hitting hard, making her limbs feel like lead. Sleep anyway, Wesley said. Your body needs it, even if your mind thinks otherwise. Clara lay down in the wagon bed, wrapped in a blanket, staring up through the juniper branches at the emerging stars. Her mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying the gunfight, analyzing every word of Wesley's theory about the Hartley Group's machinations. Wesley? She said quietly into the darkness. Yeah? When we get to your ranch, if we make it there, what are we going to do? If what you're saying is true, they're not going to stop. They'll keep coming until they get what they want. Wesley was silent for a long moment. I don't know, he finally admitted. I'm going to have to think about that, but Clara, whatever happens, whatever I decide to do, you're not obligated to be part of it. You didn't sign up for a war. Neither did you, Clara said. No, Wesley agreed, but at least I chose to be out here. You didn't choose any of this. Clara closed her eyes, too exhausted to argue. Sleep claimed her faster than she expected, pulling her down into restless dreams of gunfire and running through endless wilderness. She woke to Wesley's hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but urgent. Clara, wake up. Your turn. Clara struggled to consciousness, her body protesting every movement. The night was deep and dark, the stars brilliant overhead. Wesley handed her the rifle, showing her quickly how to hold it properly, where the safety was, how to sight down the barrel. You probably won't need it, he said, but if you see or hear anything unusual, anything at all, wake me immediately. Don't try to investigate on your own. How will I know if something's unusual? Clara asked. I've never spent a night in the wilderness before. Wesley considered this. Animal sounds are usually fine, coyotes, owls, that sort of thing. But horses, human voices, the sound of metal on metal, or sudden silence where there should be noise, those are warnings. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. He settled into the bedroll she'd vacated, and within minutes, his breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Clara marveled at his ability to simply turn off and rest, even in the midst of danger. It spoke to years of practice, of learning to grab sleep whenever it was available. She sat with her back against the wagon wheel, the rifle heavy and awkward in her lap, trying to stay alert. The night was alive with sounds she couldn't identify. Rustlings in the brush, the distant cry of some hunting bird, the whisper of wind through juniper branches. Every noise made her heart jump. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Clara's eyes grew heavy, and she had to keep pinching herself to stay awake. She thought about her parents, wondered if they were sleeping peacefully now that their debt was cleared, or if guilt kept them awake. She thought about the life she'd lost, the future she'd imagined that had evaporated like morning mist, and she thought about Wesley, this complicated man who'd bought her like property, but then given her dignity within that transaction, who'd admitted his desperation and his mistakes without excusing them, who was now potentially leading her into a war he might not be able to win. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. Clara's entire body went rigid, her hands tightening on the rifle. She strained her ears, listening with every fiber of her being. There it was again, definitely footsteps, something or someone moving through the brush. Too heavy for a small animal, too deliberate for a deer. "Wesley," Clara whispered urgently. "Wesley, wake up!" He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to her side with the silent efficiency of a predator. He listened for a moment, then gestured for her to stay low and quiet. The footsteps came closer. Clara could hear breathing now, harsh and labored. Then a voice, barely more than a whisper. "Boone? You out here? Don't shoot! It's Danny!" Wesley's body remained tense. "Show yourself. Hands where I can see them." A figure emerged from the darkness, hands raised, moving slowly into the small clearing. It was indeed Danny, the young man whose voice Clara had heard during the standoff. He looked to be barely 20, his face pale and frightened in the starlight. "I'm alone," Danny said quickly. "I swear it. I left the others back at Ridgeline. I need to talk to you." "Why should I believe anything you say?" Wesley's rifle was trained on Danny's chest. "You rode out here to threaten me." "I rode out here because Crenshaw said it was a simple intimidation job," Danny said desperately. "He said we were just going to scare you into signing some papers, that nobody would get hurt. I didn't know he was planning to actually start shooting. When Otto got hit, I realized what we'd gotten into, and I wanted no part of it." "So you're here to warn me?" Wesley's voice was skeptical. "I'm here to tell you the truth," Danny said, "and to ask you for help." "Help?" Clara spoke up despite herself. "After you tried to kill us." Danny's eyes found her in the darkness. "Otto's dying. The bullet hit something bad inside him. We got him back to Ridgeline, but there's no real doctor there, just a veterinarian who patches up cattle. Otto needs proper medical care or he's not going to make it through the night." "That's not my problem," Wesley said coldly. "You made your choice when you came after me." "Please," Danny's voice cracked. "He's my brother, my little brother. He's 18 years old, and he's scared and in pain, and I can't let him die because I was stupid enough to trust Crenshaw." He took a step forward, and Wesley's rifle rose warningly. Danny stopped. "I know I got no right to ask, but if you have any mercy in you, if you've got medicine or knowledge that could help him, I'm begging you." Wesley was silent, his face unreadable in the darkness. Clara could feel the tension radiating from him, the war between his principles and his pragmatism. "Wesley," Clara said quietly, "if he dies, and you could have prevented it—" "He chose his side," Wesley said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "He's 18, Clara pressed. "Barely more than a boy. You said yourself, the frontier is brutal enough without us adding to the body count." Wesley exhaled slowly, a sound of pure frustration. "Where's Ridgeline from here?" "About 2 hours hard ride northeast," Danny said, hope flickering across his face. "There's a trail, rough but passable." "And Crenshaw? Where is he?" "He rode out after I brought Otto back. Said he was going to Broken Creek to report to his bosses at the Hartley Group." Danny's expression twisted with contempt. "Left Otto to die while he went to save his own skin." Wesley lowered his rifle slightly. "If I help your brother, it doesn't make us friends. It doesn't mean I forgive what you did. And if this is a trap, I promise you'll regret it." "It's not a trap," Danny said fervently. "I swear on my life, I just want to save my brother." Wesley looked at Clara. "This is foolish. It could be an ambush. We should keep moving toward the ranch." "It could also save a boy's life," Clara said, "and maybe earn us an ally instead of an enemy." Wesley studied her face in the starlight, something shifting in his expression. Finally, he said, "All right, we go to Ridgeline. But Danny, you ride ahead of us where I can see you. Any sudden moves, any sign of trouble, and I drop you first. Understood?" "Understood," Danny said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank you. Thank you both." They broke camp quickly, Wesley hitching the horses with practiced efficiency despite the darkness. Danny had left his horse tied nearby, and he mounted up, keeping his hands visible as Wesley had demanded. The ride to Ridgeline was tense and silent. Clara sat beside Wesley in the wagon, acutely aware of the rifle across his lap, of the way his eyes never left Danny's back. She wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake by encouraging this mercy mission. Wesley was right. It could easily be a trap. But she also couldn't shake the image of a boy barely younger than herself bleeding out because no one would help him. The frontier was brutal enough without adding to its cruelty deliberately. Ridgeline turned out to be less a town and more a collection of ramshackle buildings clustered around a failed mining operation. A few lanterns burned in windows, but most of the structures looked abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. Danny led them to a sagging building that might have once been a bunkhouse. Inside, lamplight flickered, and Claire could hear moaning, someone in serious pain. Wesley tied the horses and grabbed a leather satchel from the wagon. "Medical supplies," he said to Clara's questioning look. "Basic frontier first aid. It's not much, but it's what we've got." They followed Danny inside. The building reeked of blood and sweat and fear. Otto lay on a rough cot, his shirt soaked with blood, his face gray as ash. Another man, older, grizzled, with the weathered look of a longtime frontiersman, was pressing a cloth to Otto's side, but blood seeped through despite his efforts. "Who's this?" the man demanded, his hand moving toward a pistol on his belt. "They've come to help," Danny said quickly. "Boone's got medical supplies." "Boone?" The man's eyes widened. "You brought the man we tried to kill here. Are you insane?" "Otto's dying, Marcus," Danny said desperately. "What else was I supposed to do?" Wesley moved past them without comment, kneeling beside Otto's cot. He pulled back the blood-soaked cloth and examined the wound with clinical detachment. Otto whimpered, barely conscious. "Bullet's still in there," Wesley said. "Lodged against something, probably a rib. It needs to come out, or infection will kill him, even if the blood loss doesn't." "Can you do it?" Danny asked. Wesley looked up at him, his expression hard. "I'm not a doctor. I've patched up cattle and horses, set a few broken bones, stitched up wounds. But extracting a bullet from a human is different. I could kill him trying." "He's going to die anyway if you don't try," Danny said. Wesley nodded slowly. "Fair point." He looked at Clara. "I need you to help. Can you do that?" Clara's stomach roiled, but she nodded. "Tell me what to do." What followed was one of the most horrific hours of Clara's life. Wesley worked with steady hands and iron control, but there was no way to make the process anything other than brutal. Otto screamed until his voice gave out, then whimpered, then fell into a mercy of unconsciousness. Clara held the lamp past instruments, swabbed blood, and tried not to vomit as Wesley dug the bullet out of Otto's side with improvised tools and sheer determination. When the bullet finally came free, a misshapen piece of metal slick with blood, Danny sobbed with relief. Wesley packed the wound with clean cloth soaked in whiskey, then stitched it closed with the same steady hands he'd used to extract the bullet. "He might still die," Wesley said flatly as he cleaned his hands in a basin of water. "Infection, internal damage, blood loss, any of those could kill him in the next few days. But at least he's got a fighting chance now." "Thank you," Danny said hoarsely. "I mean it, thank you." Wesley packed up his supplies without acknowledging the gratitude. "Marcus, I'm guessing you're the one who actually has sense among Crenshaw's crew." The older man nodded cautiously. "I've been around long enough to know when a job's gone sideways." "Then you need to understand something," Wesley said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "The Hartley Group used you. They sent you on a suicide mission because they're willing to spend your lives to get what they want. Crenshaw knows it. That's why he ran. Danny figured it out in time, but there are probably more men who don't know they're being used as expendable tools." Marcus's jaw tightened. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you spread the word," Wesley said. "The Hartley Group isn't paying anyone enough to die for them. Anyone who comes after me or my property is going to meet the same reception Crenshaw did. But anyone who walks away, who refuses to be part of their schemes, I've got no quarrel with." "You're asking us to turn against our employers," Marcus said. "I'm asking you to value your lives more than their profit margins," Wesley corrected. "There's a difference." Marcus studied Wesley for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll think on it, and I'll pass the word to others who might be getting similar jobs. That's all I ask." Wesley turned to leave, then paused. "Danny, make sure Otto drinks water, small sips but regular, and change those bandages twice a day. If the wound starts to smell bad or shows red streaks spreading from it, that's infection setting in. You'll need to get him to a real doctor fast." "I will," Danny said. And Boone? I'm sorry. For all of it. If I'd known what Crenshaw was really planning, I never would have come. Wesley's expression didn't soften, but he nodded acknowledgement. Learn from it. The frontier doesn't give many second chances. As they walked back to the wagon, Clara felt like her legs might give out at any moment. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the surgery was fading, leaving her hollow and shaking. Wesley helped her into the wagon with unusual gentleness. You did well in there, better than most people would have. I feel sick, Clara said. That's normal. Wesley climbed up beside her and took the reins. First time seeing something like that, it's always hard. But you didn't faint, didn't panic, and you did what needed doing. That takes strength. They rode away from Ridgeline in silence, the sky beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Claire's hands were still stained with Otto's blood, and she couldn't stop shaking. Why did you really help him? Clara asked finally. You could have refused. Wesley was quiet for a long moment. Because you were right. The frontier's brutal enough without us adding to it deliberately. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I remember being 18 and making mistakes, following the wrong people because I didn't know better. If someone had shown me mercy then, instead of punishment, maybe I would have learned those lessons without so much pain. Clara looked at him. This hard-weathered man who'd just spent an hour saving the life of someone who'd tried to kill him, who'd bought a wife out of desperation but treated her with dignity, who was navigating a brutal world with a moral compass that somehow stayed true even when it would have been easier to abandon it. I think, Clara said slowly, that you're a better man than you believe yourself to be. Wesley glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. Don't go making me into something I'm not. I've done plenty I'm not proud of. I'm not, Clara said. I'm just seeing what's actually there instead of what I expected to find. They traveled through the dawn, the landscape gradually transforming as they moved deeper into frontier territory. The rough scrubland gave way to rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers, and in the distance, mountains rose purple and majestic against the brightening sky. We'll reach the ranch by midday, Wesley said, assuming no more interruptions. Clara's heart skipped. The ranch. Her new home, whether she wanted it or not. The place where she'd have to decide if she could survive this harsh life, or if she'd take Wesley's offered escape and try to build something different somewhere else. What happens when we get there? She asked. I show you around, we unload supplies, and we start figuring out how to survive what's coming, Wesley said. The Hartley group isn't going to stop just because we survived one ambush. They'll regroup, try a different approach. We need to be ready. How do we prepare for something like that? Carefully, Wesley said. Very carefully. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist and revealing the landscape in sharp detail. Clara could see cattle now, grazing in the distance, small dots of brown against the golden grass. Wesley's cattle. The livelihood he'd spent 7 years building that powerful men wanted to destroy. Finally, as the sun approached its zenith, Wesley pointed ahead. There, that's home. Clara followed his gaze and saw it. A small cabin nestled in a valley, backed by a hill that provided shelter from the worst of the wind. A barn stood nearby, and she could see fenced pastures, a garden plot, a chicken coop. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, which seemed wrong until Clara realized Wesley must have banking fires that kept coals alive even when no one was home. It was small, isolated, rough and primitive compared to anything Clara had known. But as Wesley drove the wagon down the final stretch of trail toward that cabin, Clara felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Not quite hope, not quite acceptance, but something close to possibility. She'd survived the journey. She'd survived a gunfight and a desperate surgery. She'd learned things about herself she hadn't known before. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this too. The wagon pulled up in front of the cabin and Wesley set the brake. He sat there for a moment, his hands still on the reins, looking at his home with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Welcome to the ranch, he said quietly. Such as it is. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady after days of travel. She stood in the dusty yard, looking at the cabin that was now legally her home, at the vast wilderness stretching in all directions, at the man who was her husband watching her with careful, guarded eyes. Well, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, I suppose we should unload the wagon and get to work. Something shifted in Wesley's expression, respect, maybe, or relief. He nodded once and began untying the canvas covering the supplies. And Clara Boone, who had been Clara Whitmore just days ago, who had been sold like property and dragged into a wilderness she'd never wanted to see, rolled up her sleeves and started building her new life one difficult moment at a time. The cabin was smaller inside than it had appeared from the outside, but it was solid and well built. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough wooden table stood near the hearth, 2 chairs tucked beneath it. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment. A second room, barely larger than a closet, contained a narrow bed and a trunk for clothing. Clara stood in the doorway, taking it all in while Wesley hauled supplies from the wagon. The space smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something indefinable that she supposed was simply the scent of a man living alone for years. Everything was utilitarian, functional, stripped of any comfort or decoration that didn't serve a practical purpose. "It's not much," Wesley said from behind her, his arms loaded with crates, "but it keeps the weather out and the heat in. That's about all you can ask for out here." "Where do I sleep?" Clara asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw Wesley's jaw tighten. "The bedroom is yours," he said flatly. "I'll take the main room. There's a bedroll I can put down by the fire." Clara wanted to argue that she couldn't take his bed, that it wasn't right, but something in his expression told her he'd already made the decision and wouldn't discuss it further. "Thank you," she said instead. They spent the next several hours unloading the wagon and putting everything away. Wesley worked with silent efficiency, showing Clara where things belonged: flour and sugar in sealed containers to keep out mice, tools hanging on pegs near the door, medicine supplies in a wooden box on the highest shelf. Clara tried to memorize it all, knowing she'd need to find these things on her own soon enough. When the wagon was finally empty, Wesley led her outside to show her the rest of the property. The barn was small but sturdy, housing 2 horses, a milk cow, and a mule. Chickens scratched in their coop, and Clara counted at least a dozen birds. The garden plot was larger than she'd expected, though most of it looked dormant now in the late summer heat. "The spring is up there," Wesley said, pointing to the hillside behind the cabin. "That's what the Hartley Group wants. Best water source within 20 miles, never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. Without it, this ranch wouldn't be viable." Clara could see the tension in his shoulders as he spoke about the spring, the way his hand unconsciously moved toward where his rifle would normally hang. "What are you going to do about them?" "First, I'm going to ride into Broken Creek tomorrow and talk to my attorney," Wesley said. "Make sure all my claim documents are in order, file reports about the ambush, get everything on legal record. Then I'm going to fortify this place as best I can and prepare for whatever comes next." "You think they'll come here? To the ranch?" "Eventually." Wesley's expression was grim. "The question is when and how. Could be more hired guns like Crenshaw. Could be legal maneuvers, falsified documents, corrupt judges, manufactured disputes. Could be sabotage, poisoned wells, burned buildings, stampeded cattle. The Hartley Group has money and connections. They've got options." "And we have what?" Clara asked. "Just us?" "Just us," Wesley confirmed. "But we're on our own land, defending our own claim. That counts for something, and we're not helpless." He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I need to know something. Are you staying or going? Because if you're going to leave, better to do it now before things get worse." Clara looked at the cabin, the barn, the vast expanse of prairie stretching toward distant mountains. She thought about returning to civilization, trying to find work in some city where no one knew her, starting over with nothing and no one. She thought about her parents, their betrayal still raw and burning. She thought about the past few days, the fear and exhaustion, yes, but also the strange moments of clarity when she'd discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'm not leaving today. I need time to think, to see what this life actually looks like beyond the journey here." Wesley nodded slowly. "Fair enough. While you're thinking, you might as well learn what you'd be committing to. Come on. I'll show you the daily routine." What followed was an education in just how brutal frontier life could be. Wesley walked Clara through every task that kept the ranch running: feeding and watering the animals, collecting eggs, milking the cow, maintaining fences, checking cattle, hauling water, tending the garden, preserving food, repairing equipment. Each task seemed simple in isolation, but the sheer volume of work required every single day was staggering. "This is with both of us working," Wesley said as they finished the evening chores. "Alone, I was barely keeping up. Missing sleep, letting things slide, running myself into the ground. That's why I needed a partner." Clara's hands were already blistered from unfamiliar work, her back aching, her legs trembling with exhaustion. And this had been just one afternoon. "How do you survive winters?" "Barely," Wesley said. "Winter is when ranches die if you're not prepared. We'll need to lay in supplies for months of being snowed in, stockpile firewood, make sure the animals have shelter and feed. If we guess wrong on how much we need, we don't get a second chance." "When does winter start?" "First snows usually hit in October, heavy snows by November. We've got maybe 2 months to prepare." Wesley's expression was serious. "That's assuming the Hartley group gives us that long." They ate a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, sitting at the rough table while the sun set outside. Claire was too tired to make conversation, and Wesley seemed content with silence. After the meal, he showed her how to bank the fire properly, how to secure the doors and windows, where he kept the rifles loaded and ready. "You sleep light," he said. "Any unusual sound, you wake me. Don't investigate on your own." Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. She retreated to the tiny bedroom, closing the door behind her. The bed was narrow and the mattress thin, but after sleeping on the ground for 3 nights, it felt like luxury. She fell asleep within minutes, her body surrendering to exhaustion despite her mind's continued churning. She woke before dawn to the sound of Wesley moving around the main room, stoking the fire, starting coffee. Clara forced herself out of bed, her muscles screaming in protest, and emerged to find Wesley already dressed and preparing to leave. "I'm riding to Broken Creek," he said. "It's a full day's journey there and back. You'll be alone here." Clara's stomach dropped. "Alone? What if—" "You'll be fine," Wesley interrupted, but his tone was reassuring rather than dismissive. "The Hartley group won't move this fast. They'll be regrouping, planning their next approach. You're safe for today. But just in case, I'm leaving you the Winchester and extra ammunition. It's loaded and ready. You remember what I showed you about the safety?" Clara nodded, her mouth dry. Wesley crossed to the door, then paused. "There's a list on the table, morning chores that need doing. Don't try to do everything, just the essentials. And Clara, if anyone comes to the ranch while I'm gone, anyone at all, you don't open the door. You don't let them know you're alone. You point that rifle through the window and tell them to leave. Understood?" "Understood," Clara said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Wesley studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I'll be back before dark. If I'm not, something's gone wrong. In that case, you take the fastest horse, ride straight for Broken Creek, and find my attorney, Samuel Morrison. His office is on Main Street. He'll help you." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, hoofbeats fading into the distance. Clara stood in the empty cabin, the silence pressing in around her. She'd never been truly alone before. There had always been parents, neighbors, the constant presence of other people in the boarding house. Now there was nothing but wilderness and the weight of her own fear. She forced herself to move, to follow the routine Wesley had shown her. Feed the chickens, collect eggs, milk the cow. The animals didn't care that she was terrified and incompetent. They needed care regardless. The cow kicked over the milk pail twice before Clara figured out the right rhythm. The chickens scattered when she approached, forcing her to chase them around the coop. By the time she finished the morning chores, she was sweating and frustrated and ready to cry from sheer overwhelming inadequacy. But the animals were fed. The work was done. She'd survived the morning alone. Clara returned to the cabin and found the list Wesley had mentioned. The items remaining were things like checking fence lines and inspecting cattle, tasks she had no idea how to accomplish. She decided to focus instead on the interior of the cabin, which desperately needed cleaning after years of bachelor existence. She spent hours scrubbing, organizing, discovering where Wesley kept things, and creating some semblance of order. The work was mindless but satisfying, and it helped quiet the anxiety gnawing at her gut. As she worked, she began to understand the space better, saw how Wesley had arranged everything for maximum efficiency, how every item had its place and purpose. In the bedroom, she found a small wooden box under the bed. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age. Clara knew she shouldn't read them, that they were private, but her hands moved of their own accord. They were letters from his mother, written before she died. Clara read 3 before her vision blurred with tears. The woman's voice came through clearly, gentle, loving, desperately trying to protect her son from his father's violence while slowly dying from injuries both new and old. The final letter was dated 2 weeks before Wesley had said his mother passed away. She'd written about spring flowers, about hoping Wesley would find happiness someday, about how proud she was of the man he was becoming despite everything. Clara closed the box carefully and slid it back under the bed, feeling like she'd trespassed on something sacred. But she also understood Wesley better now, understood the scars he carried, the walls he'd built, the desperation that had driven him to such extreme measures to escape loneliness. The afternoon dragged on, each hour feeling longer than the last. Clara found herself constantly looking out the windows, searching the horizon for threats or for Wesley's return. The isolation was oppressive, the silence broken only by the wind and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. When hoofbeats finally sounded in the distance, Clara's heart leaped. She grabbed the rifle and positioned herself by the window, just as Wesley had instructed. But as the rider came into view, relief flooded through her. It was Wesley, returning as promised. She set the rifle aside and went to meet him at the door. He looked exhausted, dust-covered, older somehow than when he'd left that morning. "Any trouble?" he asked as he dismounted. "No, it was quiet. Too quiet." Clara helped him unsaddle the horse. "How did it go in Broken Creek?" Wesley's expression darkened. "Not well. We need to talk." They tended the horse together, then returned to the cabin. Wesley poured himself coffee and sat heavily at the table, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "My attorney confirmed what we suspected," he said. "The Hartley Group has been buying up land throughout the territory for the past 3 years. They're building towards something big, probably a cattle empire that would control most of the rangeland and water sources in the region. My property sits right in the middle of what they want." "Can they force you out legally?" Clara asked. "Morrison doesn't think so. My claim is solid, properly filed, all the homestead requirements met. But he also said the Hartley Group doesn't always operate within legal boundaries. They've got judges and officials in their pockets. They could manufacture legal problems even where none exist." "So what do we do?" Wesley looked at her intently. "That's the question, isn't it? Morrison suggested I could sell. The Hartley Group would probably offer a fair price now that their strong-arm tactics failed. I could take the money, go somewhere else, start over." Clara's chest tightened. "Is that what you want?" "No," Wesley said flatly. "I built this place from nothing. Every board in that barn, every fence post, every improvement, I did it with my own hands. This ranch is 7 years of my life, everything I've worked for. I'll be damned if I let corrupt businessmen steal it just because they have money and connections." "Then we fight," Clara said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. Wesley's eyebrows rose. "We? You've been here less than a day. You don't owe me anything, Clara. This isn't your fight." "You made it my fight when you married me," Clara said. "Like it or not, we're legally bound. What affects you affects me. And besides," she paused, searching for the right words, "I'm tired of being pushed around by powerful men who think they can control people's lives just because they have money. My father sold me because he had no other choice. The Hartley Group created that situation deliberately. They're the reason I'm here, and I'll be damned if I let them win." Something shifted in Wesley's expression, respect mixed with surprise, and something that might have been gratitude. "You realize what you're committing to? This could get dangerous, more dangerous than the ambush." "I'm already aware of how dangerous it is," Clara said. "I was there, remember? And I'm still here." Wesley studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. We fight. Together." "So how do we prepare?" "Morrison's filing formal complaints about the ambush. He's also putting pressure on the territorial governor to investigate the Hartley Group's land acquisition methods. That might buy us some time while they deal with legal attention." Wesley pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "He also gave me this, names of other ranchers and homesteaders who've had trouble with the Hartley Group. Some of them might be willing to stand together against them." Clara took the list, scanning the names. There were at least 15 scattered throughout the territory. "You think they'd help us?" "Maybe. If they see that resistance is possible, that we survived an attack and are still standing. Right now, most of them probably think the Hartley Group is invincible. We need to show them that's not true. How do we do that? Wesley stood and walked to the window, staring out at his land. We survive. We keep the ranch running. We don't give them an opening to exploit. And we reach out to these other homesteaders, build alliances, create a network of people watching out for each other. That could take weeks, Clara said. It'll take as long as it takes, Wesley said. This isn't a battle we can win in a single confrontation. It's going to be a long campaign of endurance. The Hartley Group is counting on us to break, to give up, to make mistakes born of fear and exhaustion. We prove them wrong by simply refusing to break. Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Wesley taught Clara everything he could about ranch work: how to recognize sick cattle, how to mend fences properly, how to read weather signs in the sky. She learned to shoot, spending hours practicing with the rifle until her shoulder was bruised from the recoil, but her aim was improving. She learned to ride, though the first few attempts ended with her in the dirt, while Wesley watched with carefully controlled amusement. "You're trying to control the horse," he said after she'd fallen for the third time. "Stop fighting it. Work with it. The horse knows what to do. Your job is to communicate what you want and let it do its job." Clara climbed back into the saddle, frustrated and sore, but she listened to Wesley's advice, relaxed her grip, and found that the horse responded better when she wasn't wrestling for dominance. "There," Wesley said as she managed a full circuit of the corral without incident. "See? You're a natural." "I'm covered in dust and my backside feels like someone beat it with a board," Clara retorted. "That's not natural. That's suffering." Wesley's laugh surprised them both, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed his usually somber face. "Welcome to the frontier. Suffering is pretty much the entire experience." But despite the exhaustion and the constant awareness of danger lurking beyond their property, Clara found herself adapting. Her hands grew calloused, her muscles stronger. She learned to read Wesley's moods, to anticipate what needed doing before he asked. They developed a partnership born of necessity, but growing into something more substantial, trust perhaps, or at least the foundation of it. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk. Wesley told her about the land, about the history of the territory, about the people he'd met over 7 years of isolation. Clara talked about her childhood, about her dreams before poverty had crushed them, about books she'd read, and places she'd hoped to see. "You could still see those places," Wesley said one night, "if you leave here. If you take Morrison's offer of passage back to civilization, you'd have enough money to travel, to build a different life." "Is that what you want?" Clara asked. "For me to leave?" Wesley was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "No," he finally said. "But what I want doesn't matter. You need to choose what's right for you." "And if I choose to stay, then I'll be grateful," Wesley said simply, "and I'll do everything in my power to make sure you don't regret it." 2 weeks after their arrival at the ranch, a rider approached at sunset. Wesley immediately grabbed his rifle, and Clara positioned herself at the window, her own weapon ready. But as the rider came closer, Wesley relaxed slightly. "It's Porter," he said, my neighbor, the sheep rancher." The man who dismounted was in his 50s, weathered and lean, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Boone," he said by way of greeting, "heard you got yourself a wife." "News travels fast," Wesley said neutrally. "Clara, this is Harlan Porter. Porter, my wife Clara." Porter touched his hat brim. "Ma'am, welcome to the territory. Hope you're tougher than you look, because this land will test you." "I'm beginning to understand that," Clara said. Porter turned his attention back to Wesley. "Also heard you had some trouble with Crenshaw and some of his boys. Word is they tried to ambush you on the trail." "Word's accurate," Wesley said. "You hear anything else?" "I heard Crenshaw's no longer working for the Hartley Group. Apparently they don't appreciate failures. I also heard they're looking for someone else to finish the job he botched." Porter's expression was serious. "You've made some powerful enemies, Boone." "I didn't make them," Wesley said. "They made themselves by trying to steal my land." "Semantics won't protect you when they come back." Porter crossed his arms. "I came here to offer you something. Information, mainly. I've got contacts throughout the territory, other ranchers, homesteaders, merchants in Broken Creek. I hear things. And what I'm hearing is that the Hartley Group is planning something bigger than simple intimidation." Wesley's jaw tightened. "What kind of something?" "They're bringing in a land surveyor," Porter said. "Official one, with territorial credentials. Word is they're going to claim your property boundaries are fraudulent, that you've encroached on public land or federal territory. They'll use that to invalidate your claim. That's impossible, Wesley said. I had my claim properly surveyed when I filed it. Morrison has all the documentation. Doesn't matter if their surveyor says different and they've got a judge who'll back him up, Porter said. They can tie you up in legal disputes for years, make it too expensive to fight them. Most homesteaders can't afford that kind of prolonged battle. Eventually, you give up or go broke, and they swoop in to claim the land. Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. When is this surveyor coming? Within the month, from what I hear. Porter looked between them. You two need to be ready. Document everything. Get your own surveyor out here to verify your boundaries before theirs arrives. Make sure Morrison has copies of everything in case documents mysteriously disappear. Why are you helping us? Wesley asked bluntly. We're not exactly friends. Porter shrugged. Because today it's you. Tomorrow it could be me. The Hartley Group won't stop with your land. They want the whole territory under their control. If we don't stand together against them, they'll pick us off one by one. He pulled out a folded paper and handed it to Wesley. That's a list of ranchers who feel the same way. We've been talking about forming an association, mutual protection, shared resources, that sort of thing. You interested? Wesley unfolded the paper and scanned it. Clara saw his eyebrows rise. There are over 20 names here. And more who'd join if they saw the association could actually protect them, Porter said. The Hartley Group's power comes from isolation, from making each of us think we're alone against them. We show them we're not alone. We change the equation. This could work, Wesley said slowly, hope kindling in his voice for the first time in weeks. Could work or could paint targets on all our backs, Porter said. Won't be easy, and there'll be risks. But doing nothing is also a risk. At least this way we're fighting back. Wesley looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She thought about the past weeks, the exhaustion, the fear, the constant awareness of danger. She thought about running back to civilization, to safety, to a life that didn't require sleeping with a rifle beside the bed. And she thought about the alternative, letting the Hartley Group win, letting them steal not just land but the futures of dozens of families, letting them prove that money and corruption always triumph over honesty and hard work. Clara met Wesley's gaze and nodded. We're in. Wesley turned back to Porter and extended his hand. Count us in. When's the first meeting? Next week, at my place. Bring your wife. We need everyone involved to understand what we're up against. Porter shook Wesley's hand firmly, then mounted his horse. And Boone? Watch your back. The Hartley Group doesn't take kindly to resistance. Things are about to get a lot more dangerous before they get better. He rode off into the gathering dusk, leaving Clara and Wesley standing in the yard as darkness fell around them. Are you sure about this? Wesley asked quietly. Porter's right. Things are going to escalate. This isn't just our fight anymore. It's becoming something bigger. Clara looked at the cabin, at the land they'd been working to maintain, at Wesley beside her. I'm sure, she said. We've come this far. No point in backing down now. Wesley studied her face in the fading light, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. Not just respect or gratitude, but something deeper, warmer, more personal. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His grip was warm, calloused, solid. Thank you, he said simply, for staying, for fighting, for being braver than you probably feel. Clara squeezed his hand back, feeling the calluses on her own palm, evidence of how much she'd changed in just 2 weeks. We're partners, right? That's what you said you needed. Partners see things through together. They stood there in the twilight, hands clasped, facing the darkness together. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Clara felt something other than fear or anger or resignation. She felt determined, and strangely, unexpectedly, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The week before the meeting at Porter's ranch passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Wesley rode the property boundaries with Clara, showing her every landmark, every fence post, every natural feature that defined where his claim began and ended. They documented everything in a leather-bound journal, sketching rough maps and noting distances between markers. If their surveyor tries to claim these boundaries are wrong, we need to be able to prove otherwise, Wesley explained as they stood atop a ridge overlooking the spring. Every detail matters. Every measurement. Clara copied the information carefully, her handwriting growing steadier with practice. She'd never imagined herself becoming a record keeper for a frontier ranch, but then again, she'd never imagined any of this. What if they simply ignore our documentation? Then Morrison takes it to a higher authority, the territorial governor, maybe even federal land office inspectors. Wesley's jaw was set with determination. The Hartley Group's power has limits. They can corrupt local judges and officials, but the further up the chain we go, the harder it becomes for them to control the outcome. That assumes we survive long enough to appeal, Clara said quietly. Wesley turned to look at her, his expression softening. We will. I promise you that. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the certainty he projected, but she'd learned enough about the frontier to know that promises meant little against the harsh reality of violence and corruption. Still, she nodded and continued recording their observations, because what else could they do but keep fighting? The evening before the meeting, as they finished dinner, Wesley pulled something from his pocket and set it on the table between them. It was her mother's silver locket, the one Margaret had pressed into her palm in that final goodbye. You should wear this tomorrow, Wesley said. The other ranchers' wives will be there. They'll be evaluating you, trying to decide if you're someone they can trust, someone who belongs in their community. That locket will tell them you come from a real family, that you're not just some... He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Some purchased bride? Clara finished for him. That's what I am, Wesley. We can't pretend otherwise. No, but we also don't have to advertise it, Wesley said. These people are potential allies. Their respect matters. Wear the locket. Clara picked up the small silver piece, opening it to look at the tiny portraits inside. Her parents looked so young in those images, so full of hope, before debt, before desperation, before they destroyed their daughter's life to save themselves. She closed the locket with a soft click. I'll wear it, she said, but I won't lie about how I came here if anyone asks directly. I wouldn't ask you to, Wesley said. Honesty matters on the frontier. Lies have a way of surfacing, and when they do, they destroy trust completely. They rode out before dawn the next morning, the journey to Porter's ranch taking most of the day. Clara had improved enough at riding that she could manage the trip without falling off, though her muscles still protested the hours in the saddle. Wesley rode beside her, silent and watchful, his rifle always within reach. Porter's spread was larger than Wesley's, with a sprawling main house and multiple outbuildings. Sheep dotted the hillsides like scattered clouds, and Clara could see several other horses already tied near the house. They'd arrived in the middle of the gathering. A woman appeared on the porch as they dismounted, tall and sturdy, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes assessed Clara with the sharp attention of someone who missed nothing. That's Martha Porter, Wesley murmured, Harlan's wife. She runs half the ranch and most of him. Be respectful. Martha descended the steps with purposeful strides. Boone, so you actually brought her. We were beginning to think your wife was imaginary. Mrs. Porter, Wesley said with a respectful nod. This is Clara. Martha's gaze swept over Clara from head to toe, lingering on the locket at her throat, the calluses visible on her hands, the dust on her canvas pants. City girl? Yes, ma'am, Clara said, keeping her voice steady. But I'm learning. Learning fast or learning slow? Martha's question was sharp, but not unkind. Fast enough to survive, Clara replied. Something shifted in Martha's expression. Approval, perhaps, or at least the absence of immediate dismissal. We'll see about that. Come inside. The others are waiting. The main room of Porter's house was packed with people. Ranchers and homesteaders of all ages, their faces weathered by sun and hardship. Clara counted at least 15 men and a handful of women, all of whom turned to stare as she and Wesley entered. Harlan Porter stood near the fireplace, clearly the unofficial leader of this assembly. That's everyone then. Let's get started. The next hour was an education in just how widespread the Hartley Group's influence had become. One by one, the ranchers told their stories, mysterious fences cut, cattle rustled, water sources contaminated, legal disputes manufactured from nothing. A young homesteader named Thomas Fletcher described how his barn had burned down just days after he'd refused to sell his land to Hartley representatives. An older couple, the Hendersons, had lost their eldest son in what was ruled an accident, but which they believed was murder after he'd threatened to report Hartley's illegal land grabbing to federal authorities. Each story built on the last. painting a picture of systematic intimidation and violence designed to break the will of independent ranchers and consolidate power in Hartley hands. Clara felt her anger growing with each account, her hands clenched in her lap. "The question is what we do about it," Porter said when the testimonies finished. "We can keep fighting individually and get picked off one by one, or we can band together, present a united front, make it too expensive and too public for Hartley to continue their operations." "United how?" asked an older rancher named Garrett. "We're spread across hundreds of miles. We can't exactly defend each other's property when we're days apart." "No, but we can share information," Wesley said, speaking up for the first time. "Warn each other when Hartley's men are moving, coordinate our legal defenses through Morrison and other attorneys, present collective testimony to territorial authorities. Right now, Hartley operates in the shadows. We drag them into the light." "They'll come after us harder if we organize," Fletcher said nervously. "My wife and I just had our first baby. I can't risk—" "You're already at risk," Martha Porter interrupted, her voice cutting through the nervous murmuring. "Hartley won't stop just because you keep your head down. They'll take your land whether you fight or not. At least if we fight together, we have a chance." "Martha's right," said one of the other women, a fierce-looking redhead Clara hadn't been introduced to yet. "I'm tired of living in fear. Tired of watching my husband check the barn every morning to make sure it hasn't been burned down overnight. If there's even a possibility of ending this, I say we take it." The discussion continued for another hour, voices rising and falling as people debated the risks and potential benefits of forming an official ranchers association. Clara mostly listened, absorbing the dynamics of the group, understanding how each person's history and circumstances shaped their willingness to resist. Finally, Porter called for a vote. "All in favor of forming the Territorial Ranchers Protection Association, with the goal of mutual defense against illegal land seizure and intimidation?" Hands rose slowly at first, then more confidently. When the count was finished, 18 of the 23 people present had voted in favor. The 5 who abstained weren't opposed, they explained, but needed to think about it further before committing themselves. "Then it's decided," Porter said. "We draw up official charter documents, elect officers, establish communication protocols. Morrison can handle the legal filings. We make this association known to every newspaper in the territory, every official in the capital. We force the Hartley group to operate in the open where their tactics can be exposed." As the meeting broke up, the women gathered in the kitchen while the men remained in the main room to discuss logistics. Clara found herself surrounded by frontier wives who studied her with the same assessing gazes their husbands had employed. Martha Porter poured coffee into mismatched cups and distributed them. "So, Clara Boone, tell us how you ended up married to Wesley." The directness of the question caught Clara off guard. She could feel the weight of every woman's attention focused on her, judging how she'd answer. She thought about Wesley's advice to wear the locket, to present herself as respectable, but she also thought about his words on honesty mattering on the frontier. "My father was drowning in debt," Clara said quietly. "Wesley needed a wife. Money changed hands. That's the truth of it." Silence fell across the kitchen. Some of the women looked shocked, others pitying, a few knowing. "At least you're honest," said the redhead, whose name, Clara learned, was Sarah Mackenzie. "Half the marriages out here start from desperation of one kind or another, mine included." "How so?" Clara asked. Sarah smiled without humor. "My parents died of cholera when I was 16. I had 4 younger siblings to feed. James Mackenzie needed a wife to help run his homestead. He offered to take all 5 of us in exchange for marriage. Seemed like a fair trade at the time." She paused. 10 years later, I can't imagine my life any other way. Desperation brought us together, but we built something real from it. Other women began sharing their own stories. Marriages arranged by families, unions formed to combine properties, partnerships born from mutual need rather than romance. Clara realized that her situation, while stark, wasn't as unusual as she'd feared. The frontier demanded practical solutions to survival problems, and traditional courtship was a luxury few could afford. "The real question," Martha Porter said, her sharp eyes fixed on Clara, "is whether you're staying. Because if you're just passing through, if you're planning to run back to civilization at the first opportunity, we need to know now. This association only works if everyone's committed." Clara thought about the escape route Wesley had offered her, the attorney in Broken Creek who could arrange her passage back east. She thought about the comfortable life she'd lost, the dreams of travel and education that had died with her father's debt. And she thought about the past weeks, the brutal work, yes, but also the satisfaction of watching the ranch thrive under her and Wesley's combined efforts. The quiet evenings by the fire where they'd begun to know each other as people rather than strangers trapped by circumstance. The moment of hand-holding in the twilight when she'd felt for the first time in her life like she was exactly where she belonged. "I'm staying," Clara said firmly. "Wesley and I are partners in this fight. I won't abandon him." Martha studied her face for a long moment, then nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Then you should know what you're in for. The Hartley group won't take kindly to an organized resistance. They'll escalate. That means protecting yourself when the men are out working the land. Can you shoot?" "Wesley's been teaching me," Clara said. "Teach her better," Martha told Sarah. "And someone needs to show her how to set basic perimeter alarms, string and bells, that sort of thing. If Claire's going to be alone at the ranch while Boone's out with the cattle, she needs every advantage." The women spent the next hour sharing survival knowledge. Everything from improvised weapons to hiding spots, from first aid for gunshot wounds to how to keep livestock quiet during a raid. Clara absorbed it all, understanding that this was the real value of the association. Not just the men organizing legal defenses, but the women sharing the hard-won wisdom of frontier survival. As the gathering finally broke up and people began the journeys back to their respective properties, Wesley found Clara near the horses. "How did it go? With the women?" "Better than I expected," Clara admitted. "They're tough, practical. I think they might actually accept me." "Good." Wesley helped her mount, his hand lingering on her leg a moment longer than necessary. "Because we're going to need their support. Porter says the Hartley surveyor arrived in Broken Creek yesterday. He'll probably reach our land within the week." Clara's stomach tightened. "Then it's starting." "It's been starting for a while now," Wesley said as he swung into his own saddle. "This is just the next phase." They rode through the afternoon and into evening, finally reaching their ranch as full darkness fell. Wesley immediately began checking the property while Clara tended the horses, both of them operating with the cautious vigilance that had become second nature. "Everything looks secure," Wesley reported as they met back at the cabin. No signs of intrusion. Inside, Clara heated leftover stew while Wesley checked and rechecked their ammunition supplies. The easy partnership they'd developed over the past weeks had taken on a new edge. Still functional, still efficient, but now underlaid with the awareness that violence could arrive at any moment. As they ate dinner, Wesley said quietly, "I want you to know something. If things go bad, if the Hartley group comes here with enough force that we can't hold them off, I need you to run. Take the fast horse, the one we keep saddled in the barn, and ride straight for Porter's ranch. Don't look back. Don't try to help me. Just survive." Clara set down her spoon, her appetite gone. "We've had this conversation before. I told you then I wouldn't abandon you, and that hasn't changed." "Clara." "No." Her voice was firm. "We're partners, Wesley. That means we face things together, for better or worse, remember? Those were the vows, even if neither of us believed them at the time." Wesley looked at her across the table, something complicated and painful moving through his expression. "When did you start believing them?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara thought about her answer carefully, understanding that what she said next would change everything. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "Maybe it was gradual, a little more each day. Maybe it was watching you risk your life to save Otto even though he tried to kill you. Maybe it was all those evenings talking by the fire when I realized I actually wanted to hear what you thought about things." She paused. "When did you start believing them?" Wesley's voice was rough when he answered. "The moment you chose to stay after I told you about the Hartley group. When you said we'd fight together instead of taking the escape I offered. That's when I knew you were committed to this, to us, to the ranch. That's when it became real." They stared at each other across the table, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing down between them. Then Wesley stood slowly and crossed to where Clara sat. He offered his hand. "Dance with me," he said. "What?" Clara looked around the empty cabin, confused. "There's no music." "Doesn't matter." Wesley's hand remained extended, steady and certain. "When this is all over, when we've beaten the Hartley group and secured our future, I want to remember that we took one moment just for us. No fear, no fighting, no desperation. Just us choosing to be together." Clara took his hand and stood. Wesley pulled her close, and they moved together in the small space between table and fireplace, swaying to music only they could hear. His hand was warm against her back, solid and sure. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was wrong," Wesley murmured against her hair. "That first day when I told you I needed a partner to help run the ranch. That's not all I needed. I needed someone to remind me what it felt like to be human again. Someone who saw past the walls I'd built and decided I was worth saving." Clara tilted her head back to look up at him. "You did the same for me. I was so angry when my father sold me. I felt like a piece of property, like my life had no value beyond a price tag. But you treated me like a person from the beginning. You gave me choices even when you didn't have to." Wesley's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I'm going to kiss you now. If you don't want that, tell me, and I'll stop." Instead of answering with words, Clara rose on her toes and closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more real. All the fear and exhaustion and desperation of the past weeks poured into that kiss, transforming into something fierce and bright and absolutely certain. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Wesley rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow or the next day or the next, I want you to know something. I love you. Not as property, not as a partner in some business arrangement, as my wife. As the person I choose above all others." Clara's eyes stung with sudden tears. "I love you too. I didn't think I could after everything, but somehow I do." They stood there at the firelight, holding each other, stealing this one moment of peace before the storm they both knew was coming. The storm arrived 3 days later in the form of 5 riders approaching the ranch just after dawn. Wesley spotted them first, his hand immediately moving to his rifle. "Clara, inside, now!" But Clara stayed at the window, her own rifle ready, as they'd practiced. The riders stopped at the edge of the property just beyond effective shooting range. One of them called out, his voice carrying across the morning stillness. "Wesley Boone, this is Territorial Surveyor Edmund Graves. I'm here on official business to verify your property boundaries. I have documentation from the land office authorizing this survey." Wesley stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. "Mr. Graves, I'm happy to cooperate with official business, but you'll understand if I verify your credentials before allowing access to my property." "Of course." The surveyor dismounted and walked forward slowly, his hands visible and empty. He was a middle-aged man in city clothes, carrying a leather document case. "I have all the necessary paperwork here. You're welcome to examine it." Wesley gestured for the man to approach, but kept his rifle trained on the other 4 riders who remained mounted. "Those men with you? They're surveyors too?" "Security," Graves said apologetically as he reached the porch. "The territory's been experiencing some unrest lately. My employer insisted I travel with protection." "And who might your employer be?" Wesley asked, though Clara could hear he already knew the answer. "The Hartley Land Development Company," Graves said, confirming their fears. "They've engaged me to conduct surveys throughout the region to ensure all property boundaries are properly documented and legal." "How convenient," Wesley said dryly. "And I'm sure it's purely coincidental that you're starting with my property." Graves had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mr. Boone, I'm just doing my job. I conduct an honest survey regardless of who's paying me. If your boundaries are legitimate, my report will confirm that. And if you find discrepancies that happen to favor your employer, then I report what I find." Graves met Wesley's eyes steadily. "I'm a professional, Mr. Boone. My reputation depends on accuracy, not on pleasing clients. Now, may I see your original survey documents?" Wesley studied the man for a long moment, then nodded to Clara. She brought out the leather journal where they documented everything, along with the original survey papers from 7 years ago. Graves examined them carefully, making notes in his own ledger. "These appear to be in order," he said finally. "With your permission, I'd like to verify the actual boundary markers against these documents. It should take most of today." "You can verify all you want," Wesley said, "but those 4 men stay here where I can see them. You and 1 assistant can conduct the survey. The rest wait." Graves looked back at his security detail, clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement, but unable to refuse without making his intentions obvious. "Very well, Johnson. You're with me. The rest of you wait here." What followed was a tense day of watching Graves and his assistant move around the property, taking measurements, driving stakes, consulting maps. Wesley shadowed them the entire time, while Clara kept watch on the 3 remaining security men. The men grew increasingly restless as the hours passed, their discomfort obvious. As the sun began its descent, Graves returned to the cabin, his face grave. He spread out his map on the porch railing, comparing it to Wesley's documents. "Mr. Boone," he said finally, "I need to be honest with you. My employers were hoping I'd find discrepancies. They suggested I might want to conduct a particularly thorough investigation of certain areas." He pointed to the spring. "Especially here." "And?" Wesley's voice was tight. "And your survey is accurate," Graves said. "Every boundary marker is exactly where it should be. Your claim is legitimate and properly documented. There's no basis for challenging it." Wesley's shoulders relaxed slightly. "You'll put that in your official report?" "I will, and I'll file it with the Territorial Land Office where it becomes public record." Graves looked Wesley in the eye. "I won't lie in an official document, Mr. Boone. Not for Hartley, not for anyone. My word means everything in my profession. Without it, I'm nothing." "They won't be happy about that," Clara said from the doorway. "No, they won't," Graves agreed, "and I suspect they won't pay me the second half of my fee, but I can live with that." He began rolling up his maps. "I can't live with destroying a man's legitimate claim to save a few wealthy businessmen some trouble." As Graves and his men prepared to leave, one of the security detail, a hard-faced man with a scar across his jaw, rode close to the porch. "You realize this doesn't end anything, right, Boone? Hartley's got other ways to get what they want. They always do." "Maybe," Wesley said. "But they just lost this round. And every round they lose makes them weaker and us stronger." The man spat into the dust. "You're a fool if you think you can actually beat them." "Maybe I am," Wesley agreed, "but I'm a fool who's still standing on his own land." After the riders disappeared into the distance, Wesley sagged against the porch railing, exhaustion and relief warring on his face. Clara came out and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "We won," she said softly. "The survey's in our favor." "We won this battle," Wesley corrected. "The war's not over." But he was wrong. The war was closer to ending than either of them realized, though it would take another month before they understood how definitively they'd won. The turning point came in a way Clara never expected. Danny, the young man whose brother they'd saved, arrived at the ranch one evening with news that changed everything. "Crenshaw's dead," Danny said without preamble as Wesley led him into the cabin. "Someone put 2 bullets in him behind a saloon in Broken Creek. The marshal's calling it a robbery gone wrong, but word is the Hartley group had him killed for failing to run you off." Wesley's expression was carefully neutral. "That's unfortunate." "It's more than unfortunate," Danny said urgently. "It scared the hell out of everyone else working for Hartley. We all realized that if they'd kill Crenshaw for failing, they'd kill any of us just as easily. So we started talking, comparing notes about jobs we'd done, orders we'd followed, things we'd seen." "And?" Clara prompted when Danny paused. "And we realized the Hartley group's been operating outside the law for years. Not just intimidation and property disputes. Actual crimes. Arson, theft, assault, maybe even murder that we'd all helped with without fully understanding what we were part of." Danny pulled out a thick envelope from his coat. "This is everything we could document. Names, dates, locations, descriptions of illegal activities. Marcus got several others who worked for Hartley to contribute. We figured if we were going down, they should go down with us." Wesley took the envelope carefully, as if it might explode. "Why bring this to me?" "Because you're the one who's been fighting them openly," Danny said. "You've got connections to Morrison and other attorneys. You can get this information to people who can actually do something with it. And because—" he hesitated. "Because you saved Otto's life when you had every reason to let him die. That meant something. Made me realize that not everyone out here is just trying to survive by screwing over everyone else. Some people actually try to do right." Wesley opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside. Clara watched his eyes widen as he read. "This is damning. If even half of this can be verified, the Hartley Group's leaders are looking at federal prison time. That's what Marcus said too." Danny stood to leave. "I'm getting out of the territory, taking Otto and heading to California once he's well enough to travel. Starting over somewhere the Hartley name doesn't mean anything, But I wanted you to have this first. Figured you'd earned it. After Danny left, Wesley and Clara spent hours reading through the documents. The evidence was extensive and detailed, a roadmap of corporate criminality spanning years. Everything from falsified land claims to documented violence, all tied directly to Hartley Group leadership. This could destroy them, Clara breathed. Actually destroy them, not just slow them down. Morrison needs to see this tonight, Wesley said, already moving toward the door. I'll ride to Broken Creek now. It's dark. The trail's dangerous. Can't wait. Every hour we delay is an hour the Hartley Group could discover this evidence exists and try to suppress it. Wesley paused to kiss Clara quickly. Lock the door behind me. I'll be back by morning. He was gone before Clara could argue further, disappearing into the night. Clara spent the long hours until dawn alternating between pacing and watching out the window, her rifle never far from hand. Wesley returned just as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, exhausted but triumphant. Morrison's filing everything with the territorial prosecutor this morning. He's also sending copies to newspapers in 3 cities and to the Federal Marshal Service. By this time tomorrow, the Hartley Group's crimes will be public knowledge. What followed was a cascade of consequences that exceeded their wildest hopes. The territorial prosecutor launched a formal investigation. Federal marshals arrived to arrest senior Hartley Group executives. Newspapers ran front-page stories about the land-grabbing scheme. And most importantly, other victims came forward with their own testimony, emboldened by the association's example. Within 2 months, the Hartley Land Development Company was defunct. Its leaders were awaiting trial, its assets seized, its network of corrupt officials exposed. The land they'd illegally acquired was returned to rightful owners or made available for legitimate homesteading. The association Wesley and the other ranchers had formed became permanent, evolving into a powerful voice for frontier property rights. Other territories began forming similar organizations, inspired by their successful resistance. And through it all, Clara and Wesley worked their ranch, their partnership deepening from necessity into genuine love. They built additions to the cabin, expanded their herd, became respected members of the frontier community. One evening, nearly a year after Clara's arrival, they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over land that was finally, truly, theirs without the shadow of threat hanging over it. Clara's hand rested over her still flat stomach, protecting the small life beginning there. I got a letter from my mother, she said quietly. She and my father moved out west to a smaller town where no one knows them. They're working honest jobs, barely scraping by, but managing. How do you feel about that? Wesley asked. I don't know, Clara admitted. I'm not ready to forgive them. Maybe I never will be, but I'm glad they're surviving. She paused. I wrote back, told them about the ranch, about you, about the baby. Didn't invite them to visit, but I didn't want them wondering if I was dead somewhere. Wesley pulled her closer. That's generous of you, considering. Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted them to know that what they did, terrible as it was, didn't destroy me. I survived. I thrived. I built something real from the ashes of the life they burned down. Clara looked up at him. And I found something I never would have found otherwise. What's that? You, Clara said simply. And myself. The person I needed to become to survive out here. She's someone I actually like. Someone stronger than I ever knew I could be. Wesley kissed her temple. I knew it from the moment you survived that wagon ride without falling apart. You had steel in you, even if you didn't see it yet. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The frontier was still harsh, still demanding, still capable of breaking the unwary. But it was their frontier now, theirs to shape and defend and pass on to the next generation. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked. The way we started? The $23,000? The desperate bargain? All of it? Wesley considered the question seriously. I regret that circumstances forced us both into impossible choices. I regret that your father had to choose between losing everything and losing you. I regret that I was so desperate I was willing to buy a human being like property. He turned her face toward his. But I don't regret you. I don't regret us. Something beautiful grew from something ugly, and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for that. Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Then neither do I. We survived, Wesley. We won. We did, he agreed. Together. And as darkness settled fully over their ranch, over land they'd fought for and earned, and would defend for as long as they lived, Clara Boone understood a truth that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she belonged with, living a life she'd never chosen but wouldn't trade for anything. The frontier had tested her and forged her into someone new. The man who'd bought her freedom at the cost of her father's debt had become the person she trusted most in the world. And the desperate arrangement that began in humiliation and fear had transformed into a partnership, a love story, a legend that would be told throughout the territory for generations. They'd taken the worst circumstances imaginable and built something extraordinary. Not despite the hardship, but because of it. Not in spite of their desperate beginning, but through it. And that, Clara thought, as Wesley's arms tightened around her and she felt their child move for the first time beneath her hand, was worth more than all the easy comfort and gentle romance in the world. They'd earned each other. They'd earned their happiness. They'd earned their future. And no one, not the Hartley Group or any other powerful enemy, could ever take that away from them again. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, bearing witness to two people who'd refused to break, who'd stood together against impossible odds, who'd transformed a transaction into a love worth fighting for. Clara smiled against Wesley's chest, completely at peace for the first time in her life, and whispered the words that had once been forced but were now freely given and absolutely true. For better or worse, till death do us part, I choose you, Wesley Boone. Every day, I choose you. His arms tightened around her, his voice rough with emotion. And I choose you, Clara Boone, always. And in that moment, on a frontier ranch built from nothing, defended against everything, and shaped by love born from desperation, their story found its perfect ending, or rather, its perfect beginning. Because everything they'd survived, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built together was just the foundation. The real story, the one they'd tell their children and grandchildren, was only just starting, and it would be magnificent.